Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Vanguard Wall Podcast. This is one, I feel like I say this every episode, but this is one I'm super excited about. Jess and I met, actually, you're the first person I've had on this podcast that I think I found on the internet and was like, hey, you want to come on the podcast? And yeah, you responded. I think it was a USA Sock Instagram post of somebody in kit. And I have two pretty strong-willed kids, girls, and I was like, hey man, I'm a girl dad. I'd love to have a strong female leader on the podcast. So you're like, hey man, I'm interested. And then, kind of fast forward, I think we played phone tag a little bit, and I had seen you posting on Instagram through your nonprofit Altru, which we'll talk about this documentary Guerrera. And I didn't even know what it was, but I was like, man, that looks kind of interesting. So, I took a trip with some of my friends. I think we're in Puerto Rico, and one night I was like, hey man, let's watch this documentary. So we watched this 3-episode dope documentary, which we'll definitely dive into on the backside of this podcast. And at the end of it, I was like, I saw it's executive producer Jessica. I'm like, dude, that's the girl I've been talking to. So I remember when we connected on the phone, I'm like, dude. So it was that documentary is about combat support team females. We're going to dive way into it in this podcast. So anyway, I've gotten to know you over the last couple months, man. And just, I've had a blast, just getting to know who you are and, all the different things you're involved in. You're super busy, but every time that we've talked, man, you've, taken the time. And so it's a super honor for us to have you here.
You have a lineup of incredible guests, so I feel very humbled and very much we talked a little earlier, that imposter syndrome, because, so many incredible stories that you've been able to share via this platform. And I, again, very grateful and humbled for the opportunity to be with you today. So thank you for having me.
Well, you're no imposter, and we're about to. So everybody gets an intro. So I have fun with these. I love these intros. But anyway, here's our intro for Jessica Yahn. Today, we're going to step into the world of a leader whose intellect, tenacity, and compassion have not only redefined elite military operations, but also ignited a global movement for resilience and empowerment. Major Jessica Yahn is a U.S. Army officer whose extraordinary journey began in 2010, commissioning through ROTC at UC Santa Barbara into the Signal Corps. From her first deployment to Iraq as a platoon leader, she orchestrated critical signal operations that empowered joint multinational missions. In Afghanistan, as a cultural support team leader, she executed over 40 surgical strike missions alongside Special Operations Forces, earning Distinguished Honor Graduate in the Elite Cultural Support Team program. Outpacing her peers, Jessica commanded a wideband satellite operations center in Germany as a junior captain, delivering unmatched support across 3 combatant commands. Her innovative strategies to counter adversarial electronic warfare transformed satellite communications, strengthening Joint Forces Command and Control. Selected for a U.S. Army Special Operations Special Missions Unit, she excelled in an 11-month training pipeline, earning a Distinguished Honor Graduate along the way yet again. Jessica drove pioneering initiatives and sensitive activities in the soft space cyber triad, integrating special operations with cutting-edge space and cyber capabilities to counter advanced threats. Promoted below the zone to major and ranked top amongst her peers, her leadership, defined by humility, relentless grit, and infectious positivity, marks her as a trailblazer and one of the military's most elite units. Jessica's impact extends far beyond the shadows of special operations. With master's degree in cybersecurity and operational studies, she founded Altru, a nonprofit delivering high-speed internet to girls' schools under Taliban control and powering education against oppression, amongst many other things. As the executive producer and visionary behind Guerrera, a powerful documentary series produced through Altru, Jessica lifts the veil on the opaque world of women in special operations, revealing the remarkable true story of trailblazing women of the CST teams who served at the tip of the spear in America's longest war. With a poignant focus on CST operator Jenny, whose life and sacrifice embody the courage of America's daughters, Guerrera offers an intimate portrait of these elite warfighters from outside the wire to the home front, honoring their resilience and the sisterhood forged in service. Jessica's unwavering commitment to women, peace, and security missions amplifies these voices, inspiring audiences worldwide. Join us on the Vanguard Wall Podcast to immerse yourself in the story of a leader who redefines possibility, captivating us with her journey of service, innovation, and profound global impact. That's you, girl. You ain't no imposter.
It's hard to listen to it
Yeah,
back,
I know. And you know, I do those.
appreciate
No guest I've had on here, whatever, say that about themselves. And I think that's why I do it. Because it's kind of, our tribute to these people that come on, and you have a very unique story, and I'm excited to tell the world. So, I wanted to start off with a couple of icebreaker questions. So what's a memory from your service that still makes you laugh or feel proud, no matter how small?
So here's a pretty funny one. Airborne School. I have horrible vision. Can't see like 2 feet, just horrible vision. And I had, in Airborne School, I had to wear, the big glasses. So
glasses.
I'm just looking real cool. It's the last jump. And some of my teammates were like, Jess, really? Why are you wearing those glasses? Why don't you just put your contacts in? No one's going to notice. And so we're in the, kind of lined up. We're getting our chutes checked and everything. And I had taken, my glasses were in my pants pocket, but I had my contacts in. And the airborne sergeant was coming down the rows doing the checks with everyone. And my number on my helmet was Charlie 65. And he stands me up and he's like, Charlie 65. Where are your glasses? And I was like, they're in my pocket, Sergeant. And he's like, how many fingers am I holding up? And he throws his fingers out, and I didn't want to get caught lying. I was like, let me kind of play this off. So I squinted a little bit, and I was like, 2. And he goes, you can't see. Get those glasses on. So then I pull my glasses out. I now really can't see because I have contacts on and glasses. And he's like, how many fingers am I holding up? And luckily I saw them as he like put them in front of my face. And I was like, 3. And he's like, keep those on. And so I sit down. Everyone's trying not to giggle around me as I'm, putting my glasses on the rim of my nose because I literally now can't see. Everything's blurry. I'm like, okay, I just got to get to the bird. Once I sit down, I'll put them back in my pocket. I'll do this final jump. All will be well. And on the walking out the flight line, coming up the ramp of the bird, I trip. I go sit down. Everyone's snickering again. They're like, guess who's pushing us out the plane? I was like, no. So I had to keep my glasses on, and luckily got my got out the plane safely. Immediately took them off and landed. And after that, I told everyone, I was like, I am never listening to you guys again.
That's hilarious. I remember when I first came into basic training, when the guys would get those glasses, we called them RPGs, rape prevention goggles.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
They're the most hideous looking glasses. And so those, dudes would get them on. And then of course, you got shaved heads and these big, ugly glasses. So that's
everyone's like, hey, first rule is look cool. No, first rule is not look cool. Like be able to see. And so that was a good lesson from Airborne School.
Awesome story. Hey everyone, we are excited to announce our new partnership with an awesome sponsor. When it's time to fuel my training, Alpha Country Training and Nutrition is my go-to. Founded by former Green Beret Spencer Lewis, Alpha Country crafts elite supplements to power warriors and athletes through the toughest challenges. They've got clean, effective supplements for endurance, strength, and recovery, plus apparel that actually performs. Whether you're grinding out early mornings or long miles, Alpha Country helps fuel that mission. One of their flagship products, Stay Ready Endurance, is a game changer, packed with cluster dextrin and mod carb, a premium, fast-acting, and slow-releasing carbohydrate source that keeps you fueled throughout your duration of your training. It's packed with blueberry and goji berry powders for natural antitoxin protection, has a full multivitamin blend inside, and also has electrolyte support through Himalayan pink salt and potassium. Clean, easy to digest, no bloating or heavy sugar crash that keeps you hydrated and energized during grueling workouts. Whether you're rucking in the heat, crushing high-intensity workouts, or training for Special Forces selection, this intro workout formula prevents fatigue and keeps you in the fight. Every ingredient is hand-selected for maximum performance because Spencer learned in the field, generic supplements just don't cut it. Alpha Country's entire line is built on transparency and quality, helping you recover faster and train harder. Ready to lead by example? Go to thealphacountry.com and use Vanguard 20 for 20% off your first order. That's thealphacountry.com, code Vanguard20 for 20% off your first order. Power up and stay fueled with Alpha Country. Your body, your community, and your country deserve it. If you could share a meal with a teammate or mentor from your past, who would it be and why?
My grandma. and really it's two, I would say Jenny Moreno and my grandma. So Jenny Moreno, I had a fantastic meal with before we deployed to Afghanistan. And we'll talk about her later, but she was killed in action. And when you get the chance to have just one-on-one time with really good people, you can never get enough of that. And then my grandma, Jenny dies at 25. My grandma lived a really long, healthy life, died at 97. So I had plenty of meals with her, but to get, again, time is something we can't get back, and to spend just that quality time with people that you love, that are good people. You always hope for one more meal with people like that.
Dude, such great words. Yeah. We were literally just talking about time this morning.
Yep.
Well, I like to tell kind of, bio stories, and you have just like just a total all over story, including your military service, but also, pre-service and post. So can you kind of take us back to, your childhood, and we'll start kind of just tell me where you grew up, family, siblings.
My dad and mother were high school sweethearts.
That's awesome.
Born and raised in Wheeling, West Virginia, small town. Dad joined the Air Force, so we grew up moving around a lot. I have 4 sisters, all girls. Dad kept trying for a boy, and finally Mom was like, that's enough. So we had, they also, some crazy idea to name us all the same initials. So it's Jacqueline, Jessica, Juliana, Janelle, Joanne. And we jokingly say my dad was trying to save on the monogrammed towels. But
that's hilarious.
I was almost an Adrian, and my dad was like, no, everyone will just refer to Rocky. I would actually love that. I love the Rocky movies, but we ended up, being all JMY. And so it was a chaos in the household with a bunch of, girls and
your
sports.
Dad's a saint.
Yeah. My mom's a saint.
True.
But I would characterize the environment as one filled with love. I'm very fortunate, not just within my immediate family, but we had extended family, tons of cousins, beach trips, just spent a lot of time with your, people that love you. And so love, my mom very much instilled in us like a sense of just being good humans. I mean, we grew up Catholic. And again, even in the extended family, those that weren't practicing Catholics still just had a very, grounded sense of morality and just being good, and doing good in the world. And then huge emphasis on learning. My dad would be doing math problems at the kitchen table just randomly. We would read all the time. So there was always kind of like a tenacious yearn for education and just being curious about the world. And then there was sports and competition, and it was always healthy competition, but that's kind of like the environment that we grew up in. Jess, to paint a picture of like what I was like as a young kid, I mean, I would wear an iguana t-shirt one day, like tie-dyed black and green. I had, like purple tights and this iguana t-shirt, and I'd go out on the school kickball field, and the boys would be like, back up, she can kick this thing far. And I'm like, yes. And then, the next day I wear those same purple tights. I put on a yellow dress, and I'm like putting toilet paper in my bra to do a Spice Girls concert with my girlfriends. And we're, riding our bikes down the street yelling GP, GP for girl power, obviously. And so it was just very much a safe childhood, Americana, freedom, running the streets.
I love it.
But very much grounded, again, love, grounded in being a good and, having a good impact on society, and just learning and then working hard.
Yeah. Growing up as a military brat with an Air Force dad who was a pilot, I think he was a U-2 pilot, right?
Yes.
How did that shape your view of service?
So again, that family kind of element is extended when you grow up in a military family, because you kind of see that on the military side, that there's this whole other close-knit team, essentially. You know, I saw that with my dad and his friends, and, you know, my mom and the families that we were surrounded by growing up on military bases. But I'd say one of the cool experiences that we got to, you know, have growing up, you know, the U2 is a really unique platform at Beale Air Force Base is where the U-2s, you know, fly out of. And so we'd do these Christmas parties, and like my sister and I would dress up as elves, and we got to take the chaser cars and help the U-2 land. So the U-2 has such a long wingspan that the pilot actually like shuts off the engine, and you've got a Camaro like right in on the wings to say, hey, you're 5, 4, 3, you know, inches above the ground, to let the pilot know when to, you know, shut it off to help land. And so we'd be riding in the chaser cars, get to do that, you know, and see that kind of cool environment. And then we'd get out, you know, you'd have Santa Claus come out of the U-2, and then my sisters and I with our elf costumes are sitting on the wings of the U-2. It's just, you look back and you're like, man, that is a really unique experience. And it was just that environment. You just wanted to be a part of it. And so I always kind of knew I wanted to serve, and, you know, grew up watching movies like Patton, Deer Hunter, 12 O'Clock High. My dad loves that one. You know, just good leadership movies, huge history buff. And then 9/11 happened.
I can imagine that's pretty weird. Well, not weird, but I mean, you know, you're in 8th grade. You probably didn't totally grasp, you know, the total global impact of the war. But, you know, having your dad work at the Pentagon, and he could have been in the office, you know, when the plane hit, like, how did that sit with you?
It definitely, you know, makes you think about life, right? Just, hey, you know, how quickly things can change. And I don't know if from my dad's perspective, I mean, he was deployed a lot, and normally it would be like 2 months gone, 2 months home, 2 months gone. And it picked up some after 9/11. But when you're a kid, you know, you're kind of just going through your day to day. I always think about how my mom managed with my dad gone and having 5 kids, and my grandma was a big part of helping her manage that. You know, she'd come in, or other family members would come in and help. So very fortunate, because it seemed seamless to us that we still had a strong support network, but the desire to serve definitely grew as I watched, you know, my dad, you know, my mom, my family, just all kind of, again, be part of that larger service-oriented community. And there's another incident where my dad, he actually did an aileron roll in the U-2, which is unheard of.
Yeah.
He was caught in really bad turbulence on a mission, and I think he came back home and told us, you know, hey, I thought that was it. You know, I was going to eject, and he was over an ocean, probably would have frozen to death. It was winter, and he just let his hands go. And he's like, I'm just going to let it take me. And the whole U-2 turned over.
So you did like a whole barrel roll?
A whole
in
barrel
a
roll. Only, you know, people didn't believe him when they pulled back and they looked at all the, you know, computer and systems. You know, I don't know exactly what that entails, but they're like, dang, yeah.
Yeah, for the listeners out there, a U-2 is a massive airplane. It has a massive wingspan. So, yeah, that probably is pretty unheard of.
Yeah, so that's his claim to fame. But again, when life can change so quickly, it helps you focus on what's important.
100%. Yeah, I'd love to see that on the next Tom Cruise Top Gun.
Yeah,
to a barrel roll on a U-2. I know you were an avid soccer player, and you ended up going to the Air Force Academy. When did the military, if you can kind of remember back, when did it fully come on your radar? Like, hey, I'm going to join the service.
It was about junior year of high school. And so then, you know, you're putting in your application packets for the different schools you want. I was pretty much all in. I really wanted to go to the Air Force Academy. Part of that was my dad had, he didn't go there, but he had taught there. And again, I knew I wanted to serve. And I was recruited by the Air Force Academy to play soccer there. And so for me, filled out the application, and it's a competitive school to get into, but I think and I'm definitely not the smartest person in the room, but had the sports aspect, you had kind of a well-rounded application, and was fortunate to be accepted, and, did my first year, there in Colorado Springs. Came off the bus. I remember basic training, like waving goodbye to, my mom. And then you kind of feel like you'd be ready for it because I grew up in a military family, but then you're not really ready for it. You're like, oh my gosh, someone's in my face screaming at me. And, you just jump right into it.
Talk to me a little bit about the Air Force Academy. We were watching something with the kids the other day on those academies, and a lot of people don't realize, those are, not only are they tough to get into, but it's almost like, at least like Naval Academy, West Point, Air Force Academy, it's almost like 4 years of basic training. Can you tell us a little bit about, what it was like when you first got there, and just a little bit about the Air Force Academy?
The academies are very much like you said, basic, you're going to have a lot of rules. And so I only did the Air Force Academy for 1 year. I was a little free spirited for that place.
I love it.
And we can get into that. The difference between the Air Force Academy and then a normal college experience is night and day. But what you do get from the academies is you're going through hard things with, guys and gals on your left and right. And so you create really strong relationships. And I think if you ask anyone that goes to one of those academies, like when they look back, they may not have loved it during it. Some do, but when they look back, they're like, man, some of my best friends, I got out of that place. And it's just because you have a lot of time on target with those people. You're eating together, you're in the dorms together, you're not living off campus, you're going to classes together, and then you're challenged together. And so that's when you kind of really get to know a person. And so I think anyone, again, would say that it's well worth the additional sacrifices you have to make. Because, at the Air Force Academy, your freshman year, you're like carrying your backpack in your hand. You can't put it on your shoulders. You're running along certain tiles, and you can't step off the line. You're going to get yelled at. There's all these rules. And it's like, why are there so many rules? And of course, again, free-spirited person, I'm like, find every way to, push the envelope. Absolutely. And I ended up, I was on probation for drinking underage, which, a lot of people do, but, I happened to get caught. Experience. So, and I lied about it. And so the academies, they take integrity very seriously, as they should. And so I was on honor probation and conduct probation, and I was journaling, and I actually had to stay my freshman year at the academy. I had to stay and serve confinements because of getting in trouble. And so you'd have to get in your nice uniform, and you sit at attention at your desk, and you have to write your journals, or you have to at West Point you walk hours. So I always love meeting the people that are like, oh man, I had the most hours of my class. You're like, okay, you have you're some one good of us stories.
Yeah. You're one of us.
But one of the things that came out of that probation period, if you will, was I read the book We Were One, and it was about the Marines who took back Fallujah.
Wow.
And that book left an impact on me and kind of made me start thinking about, hey, how do I want to serve? I knew I wanted to serve, but then how I wanted to serve, I think I kind of refined while I was, serving those confinements.
Yeah, and I'm sure, all that thinking outside of the box definitely served you later in your career for sure.
Yes.
So what happened? How did you end up leaving the Air Force Academy and going to UC Santa Barbara?
So I again, had a great first year, but because of my probations, I was not going to be able to play soccer. I was also struggling even, some of the academics they are tough. And so I think that though the main factor for me was, hey, I think I might like the Army, or might want to be in the Army. And I at that time I couldn't fly. I found out that my eyes weren't, they were doing PRK, but my eyes were even too bad for PRK. So I was like, hey, I can't be a pilot, which is kind of what I thought I wanted to do. And after reading again that book, I was like, I think I want to be like on the ground, and I want to, lead in kind of that capacity. And the other thing I think that was a indicator for me was one of the days in basic training, they have you, you're tromping around the woods, and you've got this opposition forces, and you're meant to react. And I was the only one out of my group that successfully maneuvered. I outflanked the enemy. I got the high ground, came up behind the Op 4, which are just, seniors. And, I had my weapon pointed, my dummy rifle, and I was like, safety kill, safety kill. I was like, man, I'm so good at this. Yeah. So let me find a place where I can really do
actually,
that more.
The question I wrote down was, when did you realize you were in the wrong service?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's awesome. And so how did UC Santa Barbara come on the radar?
So my older sister was at Santa Barbara, and I called up the Army ROTC unit there, and I was like, hey, yeah, I got in some trouble here at the academy, but this is me. And they're like, yeah, come on over, here's the back, like, apply and we'll see what happens. And so I was able to kind of transfer, all my credits transferred, came in just sophomore year at UC Santa Barbara on an ROTC scholarship. And then I also played some club soccer. Santa Barbara Division I is very different than Air Force Academy Division I, and so my soccer, I wasn't able to translate that over, but it was still great to have that community as well outside of ROTC. Just again, sports has always been something that I've been drawn to.
You kind of had told me and described UC Santa Barbara as kind of like a party school, but you thrived in ROTC. Like, how did you balance? I mean, again, dude, you're what, 18, 19 years old, and Santa Barbara's beautiful. You got the beach life, but how did you kind of balance, life, college, ROTC? Because it's a commitment.
It is. I enjoy bringing people together, and sometimes they're like, oh, you're a partier. I'm like, I'm actually not like a crazy partier, but I do like, to bring people together. I think at Santa Barbara, though, I had my tight-knit group of friends, which were mostly ROTC guys. It's not a huge program, and there weren't a lot of women. I was the only woman in my class or my grade. And so, you make these good friendships, but you're all kind of focused on this, there's a greater purpose. Like you're working towards something, after college already. And I felt that was, I was actually grateful for that, because a lot of my friends that weren't in ROTC, they're like, what am I going to do next? How am I going to, or, they're thinking about their job. And it's like, when you're in ROTC, like on the back end of that, you're going to raise your right hand, and, it's all about preparing for that. So I think that helped keep me focused. Yeah, sure. I had my, was able to enjoy,
it's college, boy. You gotta have fun.
Yeah. We lived on the beach. Like our house, we had an ROTC house. So I lived with all the guys, and I was out in what was like a little gazebo basically. And sometimes I'd wake up in the middle of the night, and I'd be like, is it Red Dawn? What's going on? And they're like, Call of Duty just came out. So they're all, in the living room playing Call of Duty. But I think, having that knowing that what I was about to enter into, I think just made it easy to focus on that.
Yeah. And I want to be crystal clear. I mean, I still think you can work hard and have fun at the same time. And it sounds
100%.
like, that's what you did in ROTC. Can you explain a little bit about ROTC? I mean, we have a lot of listeners out there, we kind of have an older listener group that may have kids. I have kids. Can you kind of just explain a little bit about ROTC and kind of what it is, and kind of what you do? I mean, obviously ROTC, I don't even know what it stands for.
Reserve Officer Training Corps.
Okay, yeah. And so ROTC is a program that a lot of colleges have, where you kind of go to college and you do kind of military training at the same time. And then, like you say, when you graduate college, you enlist. But will you explain a little bit about kind of like what you do at ROTC at college?
Yeah, and it depends on kind of what program you go into. So, for example, Virginia Tech or Texas A&M have these massive ROTC programs that are almost a little more like an academy. Not completely, but they're just larger programs. At Santa Barbara, it was a really small program. But ultimately, there's multiple ways to commission or serve. Again, you can enlist. For commissioning, though, you can go to academy. You can do ROTC, which is like part-time version of an academy, or officer candidate school. And ROTC is kind of a way to enjoy, again, like a normal kind of college experience, but then also, once a week you're going to be doing a leadership lab. So for us, that looked like going out with our tactical instructor was actually a guy from 275, Jeremy Brown, awesome leader. And he was our tactics instructor. So we'd go out with him, hit the beaches of Santa Barbara. So it's funny, people are like walking to class and you're like low crawling through the, through the dunes, working on, shoot, move, communicate, like the basic small unit tactics. You have a class or two a week that are going to be focused on just the military as a whole, whether that's leadership, rank structure, ethics. And so it's not a lot of hours in the week that you're actually having to commit while you're doing your normal college classes. And then the other, thing throughout, as you get closer to graduation, there's this thing called LDAC. Leadership, I should know the acronym, but essentially you go away and you go to camp for a while, and that's where you learn, again, some basic Army skills, land navigation. You're doing physical fitness, basic leadership, running through what they call sticks lanes. And so again, ROTC is a good mix of, you're getting a taste of that military life, but you're also able to have some kind of normalcy in terms of a little more freedom than you would maybe if you were at an academy.
That's awesome. Imagine starting at the line, heart pounding, ready to earn your place among the elite. At Titan Coaching, former Rangers, Green Berets, SOF, airmen, and law enforcement specialists stand beside you, guiding every step of your journey. From land navigation drills and brutal ruck marches to pool prep for dive school and long-distance runs, they craft a plan tailored to your goal. SFAS, Ranger School, BUDS, Delta Selection, MARSOC, or law enforcement careers, you'll master body mechanics, dial in nutrition, and build mental resilience before and after the grind. If you're serious about earning the right to wear the badge or a tab, visit TitanCoaching.com for an exclusive consult. Titan Coaching, your advantage starts here. Any mentors or peers during your ROTC time that kind of influenced you?
Yeah, I mentioned actually, our instructor from 275, Jeremy Brown, he was, I think, integral in just shaping our understanding of not just being like tactically and technically proficient and the importance of that, but, you're going to be a platoon leader. And so having that competency and the confidence of kind of those basic skills. And again, I commissioned as a signal corps officer, so I'm a communicator. I'm not, an infantry or a combat arms platoon leader, like maneuvering elements on a battlefield. But that all that matters, and it still kind of ties into, we're all soldiers. And I think Marines, their branding is probably some of the best. It's like
Absolutely.
Marine first. You've got to know those skills, and that's like 101 stuff. And so I feel, Sergeant Brown, he was just, instilled that in us from the beginning of like being good at the basics.
And by the time you got to UC Santa Barbara, you were a sophomore. I mean, GWAT had kicked off. We were probably 4 or 5 years into the war. So
right.
Did it ever like occur to you, kind of as you're going through ROTC, like, hey, this could be real later on? It
did. And I'm a war movie buff, history buff. And so throughout that whole time doing ROTC, I was kind of keeping a pulse on what's going on in the Middle East, as were my peers. And I'd say I learned just as much from my peers too, as I did, you mentioned like mentors or what else kind of shaped me during that period. And I had just a bunch of great guys that, pushed me, to to be the best version of myself I could be. And so we had things like Ranger Challenge. You compete with the other ROTC units. And I remember this one challenge, and the rule I think at the time was like you had to have a female on the team, at least one female on the team. And I'm the only female. So of course they're like, yeah, Jess, you're going to do Ranger Challenge. I'm like, yeah, I actually want to, but yeah, I'll volunteer. And, so it's just like extra time, you're spending doing ruck marches. It's a lot of, physical competition, but then you also do things like the leadership reaction courses. And so there was this one, and my buddy, his name's Kevin. He's like, all right, we got to get everyone from this side of the field to this side of the field, and we can only touch the ground with one person at a time. And you got to get, it's like one of those puzzles that they give you. So he's like, here's what we're going to do. Jess, you're going to jump on my front. And so like a koala, you're going to hug me. And then Carrie, you're going to get on my back, and I'm going to carry everyone across the water, and I'm like, all right, I don't know if this is a great idea, but let's do it. And so Kevin mounts, I get on the front, Carrie Jones gets on the back, and, like he takes off instead of just like walking across this imaginary river. He takes off and he trips. And next thing you know, all three of us are like flying through the air, parallel to the ground. They land on me because I was the one on Kevin's front side. And at that point, we're just like rolling, laughing. And I'm like, you guys, I literally just peed my pants. I'm like, thank you for that, But you have those, again, a lot of good laughs, a lot of good friendships, but then also that drive for, excellence. And that same Ranger Challenge, we're ruck marching, and they're, pushing me to, hey, let's keep our lead, and you've got, guys cheering you on and being good teammates. And I think that was something that I found everywhere in the military. Every unit that I went to after that was just, really great teammates. So.
Yeah. And I'm sure that definitely carried you forward all that experience. Cause I'm looking at your picture with, you in a premier USASOC assault force, so it definitely, you can kind of see the linear path. How did you pick your branch coming out of ROTC, or was it picked for you? How does that work?
You have a wish list, and one of the things you do in ROTC and probably at the academies as well is like you kind of have a career day and you like learn about the different branches. And for me, I didn't have any combat arms, wasn't open to women at the time. I didn't really have a strong desire for any one branch in particular, but I put, military intelligence, signal, engineer, and signal was my second choice. And that's what I ended up getting, commissioned as.
And did you get to pick your station of choice, or?
No, you can do things like they're called ADSOs, where you're like, if you really want to be in a certain location, you could say, hey, I want Fort Carson, Colorado, and I'll do extra years. I'll add years to my contract for that. You can do the same thing with your branch if you really want to be a certain branch. Sometimes it just depends on the needs of the Army, what's available for, the ADSO options. I didn't do any of that. I was like, hey, send me wherever. And again, signal to me was something that seemed interesting because every unit needs it. So I think there were a lot of opportunities within the Signal Corps to find your way into some unique units. And so that's, why I ended up going that way.
Where was your first duty station?
Center of the universe, Fort Bragg.
Fayetteville, the most beautiful city ever.
Heck yes.
Yeah. How was that?
I really enjoyed it. And as soon as I got to the first unit, 35th Signal Brigade, 50th Signal Battalion, Expeditionary Signal Battalion, I was, we were deploying. And so as a really young second lieutenant, I quickly was on the lead up to go to Iraq, and that, just, again, it's coming. We're in the GWOT, we know that we've got forces deployed, and that was pretty an immediate reality for me when I got to Fort Bragg.
What was it like showing up as a new second lieutenant Fort Bragg's, the epitome of the airborne, highest breed of corps for the Army. You're coming from UC Santa Barbara, kind of a laid back, chill ROTC program. You're driven, obviously, but what was that cultural shift?
So getting to Bragg, and you're going to Ardennes, right? You see all like 82nd, everyone's running. It's a very high op tempo kind of post to be at, and I don't think there was necessarily a culture shift in my mind for me going from Santa Barbara to that, because I had prepared for. I kind of expected to be, hit the ground running, and again, then we were on this deployment, or with this upcoming deployment, it was just you're kind of hyper focused on that mission, and I was just excited, really.
What did you get? Did you take over a platoon, or did you start off in the ops, or where do you?
Yeah, started off in the ops section, and then going forward, at the time that our signal battalion, which is normally a more tactical signal, we were running what were called direct signal support, sites, so strategic communication. So it was a little different mission than what the Expeditionary Signal Battalion was kind of trained to actually do. So forward, essentially, it's the same thing kind of as a platoon leader, but I ended up running one of these sites. So we were spread out all over Iraq. You had the headquarters kind of element was in Baghdad. When I first got there, I spent a little time still in the ops section in Baghdad, just learning, the ropes a little bit, but then pretty quickly was positioned out in Basra to run one of these sites.
Yeah, and just so kind of the listeners kind of have an idea, the Army has to shoot, move, and communicate, right? And communicate's a big piece of it. So like the signals core, there's a lot to it. There's so many different pieces of communication, whether it's, you have your top secret lines, your regular stuff, you have satellite communications, remote communications, and there's such a wide spectrum of jobs kind of in the signal corps. As far as you can tell us, what were you doing kind of at the time, or what was your mission, or kind of what was your focus?
Yeah. So for Basra specifically, we had, I would just say, the big pipe. So anything that's strategic communications, we're running the site that's enabling that for all of the supported units. So what that looks like in practice is, you have kind of a 24/7 ops center, my soldiers' expertise, and the contractors that supported us. There were a lot of contractors that supported, this mission set. Would just make sure, again, those communication lines were still green. Sometimes I'd find myself running, doing cable dog work, like running cables or programming a encryption device, and you're just keeping that up, so that everyone on the base, so that, your generals are able to communicate back or forward. But again, strategic level, not tactical comms. So we weren't programming radios or anything like that for maneuver units. It was the larger satellite dishes that we're managing, and kind of the support behind that.
Any high pressure mission, any high pressure missions or anything when comms went down and you were on the hook for it?
I have some stories of those in my company command time, which was at a wideband satellite operations center. But for this, it was a pretty well-oiled machine. I'll say, I think the pressure came when we were closing down things in Iraq, and so then it was, hey, find all you're gonna actually tear stuff down. You gotta account for all the property that's every router, every switch all over the base at Basra, and closing that down. And then simultaneously we stood up a small terminal for the Department of State consulate that was being stood up in Basra at the time. So nothing going down, no one calling you like, what the heck? Why am I unable to talk right now? But the being able to account for all of that equipment and tear down in a timely manner, and then still be able to maintain comms for some of those kind of unique customers.
That first combat deployment, you're a new leader. What was it like being in a leadership position? I mean, you've trained for it, right? You've gone ROTC, your dad was an officer in the Air Force, but what was it like being in a war, and leading soldiers?
I, really just felt like I was always a sponge. I was always trying to lead with humility and curiosity, because there's so much, especially as a second lieutenant, like, you don't know, these guys have been doing this, guys and gals have been doing this for years. Those contractors that were out there running those sites, I mean, a decade. They were living in Iraq for a decade, basically running this stuff. So I think as a junior leader, a lot of what's expected of you is to learn your craft, and at least, again, be willing to ask the questions and kind of understand what it is that your folks are responsible for. At the same time, there's still a lot of responsibility on your shoulders, and so I had an incident with a senior NCO who was having a lot of anxiety. So how do you kind of navigate taking care of people, still being able to get the mission done? So I had some of those challenges while out there, and that was, first rep at navigating some of that stuff. And I think one of the things that was helpful to me, or for me, was being able to have a couple folks, whether they were peers or, a first sergeant or a platoon sergeant, somewhere, like always having someone that you could maybe like bounce an idea off of, or like an approach for how you're tackling one of those challenges. I made plenty of mistakes. I remember one time I wrote an email straight to the battalion commander as a, apparently I'm like, oh yeah, I guess maybe I should go through the S3 or the ops section. So there's things that you learn, and you got to give yourself grace. You're going to make mistakes, but learn from them and kind of keep moving on. I think I've carried that throughout my career as well.
On that first deployment, what was a personal challenge, maybe an unexpected emergency or failure that tested you kind of early on?
The one that comes to mind most is kind of the dynamic nature of having to draw down, and then also be able to stand up a new comms platform, essentially, for this unique mission partner. And it took, you have limited resources and limited bandwidth. And so I think what I learned out of that was just the ability to kind of synchronize across the things that you can control and, delegate in a way so that you can still accomplish everything you need to in the finite amount of time that you have given.
How did that shape your confidence kind of going forward? Like having to, again, like you just said, account for, and for those folks that are listening that haven't served in the military, the military has this system where as an officer, you're signing for sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment you may or may not have seen. And then, you're having to account for everything and then rebuild a new platform, and you get it done. Does that kind of, shape your confidence going like, hey man, I can do this?
Absolutely. And I think sometimes as we grow in our profession, there's things that you can definitely do to be a better leader, the professional development, like reading, listening to, consuming other great examples of leadership. Sometimes though, it's just reps, and sometimes it's just, you got to get the experience. And so for me, again, super grateful to have an experience where I was deployed, away from the flagpole, leading a small unit at a kind of isolated, forward operating base. And that it's a rep, and it just helps you, you've got that now in your belt. And now when you go forward and you're faced with another problem, you're like, yeah, I've done this before, or, I've got that, to kind of fall back on.
Before we move on from this deployment, just one last question too. Looking back, what's a vivid sensory memory from that deployment? Sights, sounds, or feelings that kind of still sticks with you?
This is kind of a funny one, but
like
burning
funny.
my tush on a porter john, it's just something about the that heat. And I remember being in Baghdad and like going in, and everything's hot and dusty, and all the water bottles on those crates, like you just remember that about the time that you're there, of Yeah, you're in the desert.
The Middle East has biblical heat.
Biblical heat.
It's the hottest place on the planet. In my opinion.
I really perfected the crouch during that
Sure.
deployment.
Yeah, and not to be super grotesque, but the porta johns were like super nasty, and then they would fill up. So I remember like when the trucks would come in to clean the porta johns, it was like people have been waiting all day. It's like a mad dash to get to like a clean porta john. That's pretty funny. So after that deployment, you get back. What was next on the horizon for you, or what was next up in your career?
I had a warrant officer that handed me a flyer, and it was for this thing called Cultural Support Team. And he was like, "Hey, I think you'd be really good at this, and I think you should try out." And, at the time, I read the flyer. It's like, "Hey, U.S. Army Special Operations Command is looking for women to volunteer for this program. There will be a selection, and you'll deploy alongside special forces elements in Afghanistan." And so I was like, heck yeah, this seems cool. I'm kind of someone that always like tries to seek out a challenge. I think that kind of came from, again, my upbringing. And so I had initially asked to go. My command at the time, I was in a platoon leader position, and I was on the Global Response Force. So, 82nd, 18th Airborne Corps, has that mission. And so you think like hurricanes across the East Coast, we would do a lot of the response for that. And as a communications unit, we'd tie in with FEMA and all of these other organizations and entities to ensure that first responders would be able to work through post-disaster. And so my command, they were like, "Hey, we're supportive of this, but we don't want you to try out this iteration. Finish out your platoon leader time, and then go out for this." So that's.
Were you able to ask any questions about like what the mission was, or the training, or because it was new?
No, I mean, a lot of things when you get in the special operations realm, like a lot of the emails that go out for recruiting or for opportunities are very vague, and it's a little bit of a leap of faith, I think, anytime you're going out for something like that. Now, if you have folks that that are already on the other side of it, then you might be a little more well informed. I didn't know anybody in special operations, let alone as a former cultural support team member or anything like that. So I was definitely going in blind, but I was drawn to it because, going back to reading, We Were One and the Marines Who Took Fallujah, it's like, hey, this is the men that are out there doing it. These are my heroes. How can I support that and be that close to the action and support that mission? And so to me, this was a way to get closer to the tip of the spear.
Yeah, I would imagine there's kind of like a certain mystique when you get this kind of like, "Hey, come try out for this thing, and we're not going to tell you much about it," knowing your personality, and you're probably just like, "Yeah, I want to try that." How did you convince your battalion commander after that initial pushback to kind of let you go?
He didn't really need. It's not that he wasn't supportive, so he didn't really need convincing. But I know that other teammates that I had were straight out told no, and they had to navigate that kind of differently than I did. For me, it was just, hey, I owe my platoon this. This is my responsibility right now to close out this period of my platoon leader time. And I just made it very clear, like, I will apply for this. Like, I don't know if I really had the authority to do that. I don't know who I would have called if he had, if the command had legit told me like, no. But
with all due respect, sir.
Yeah, with all due respect, sir, I'm applying for this. No. I do know, again, some other teammates had to make calls to IG or some other. They had to pull some other lever to ensure that they were able to take advantage of the opportunity.
So at this time, are you a first lieutenant?
Yes, first lieutenant.
So you finally So, I mean, you finally, you get an email, like, how did the whole selection thing go down?
Once I did put my application in and was accepted to assessment and selection, that's where you start getting butterflies. And, even though I'm really gung-ho and want to do this, I mean, I get butterflies anytime I'm doing something new. Even in ROTC, when, I talked about going to that leaders course, like on the bus to that, you get a little butterflies. You're going to be around a bunch of new people. You don't really know what to expect. But, I'm also comfortable in that environment. So you show up, day one, and you're looking around and there's just alpha woman after alpha, just a bunch of really bad looking awesome people, So you're like, man, I'm in a place where I'm going to be challenged, and the women now on my left and right are going to help me discover what I'm made of. And whether I am successful or not, I'm going to learn something about myself. And so one of the ways that I approach any assessment selection or any of these like courses or challenges is you're going to get something good out of it no matter what. And that's what I also tell folks that are considering trying out for anything. It's like, hey, what's the worst that can happen? They don't take you. One door closes, like go find another door, another opportunity will open. And I think that's helped me manage the ambiguity that is purposefully baked into selections and training courses.
So how was that selection for you?
I loved it. I mean, it was a combination of, physicality tests, a lot of ruck marching, your typical physical fitness test, upper body strength. They're looking at all of that. They're looking at the mental component, like how resilient are you? Do you give 100% at every event? And then how you kind of perform or how you work as a team. So kind of all of those, I'd say, the physical, mental, and like how you are as a teammate are kind of three core things that, they're looking at. And the assessment selection was modeled after, the program was run by, again, U.S. Army Special Operations Command, USASOC. They modeled that ANS after, like a civil affairs PSYOP selection. And again, this was the first time that the command was purposefully putting women through this RAST, recruit, assess, select, train process due to the operational requirement, downrange specifically in Afghanistan.
Did they tell you kind of in selection, like what was the operational requirement? Like at what point did you guys learn like, hey, this is what I'm going to be doing? Or was it the whole thing a secret?
So that I will say that was kind of clear on the initial flyer. And so there were two sides of the cultural support team program. There was the direct action side and village stability operations. And the flyer, and I remember like what you did kind of hear about it on the outside before, getting through ANS was, I think, leaned into the cultural aspect of cultural support team. So when I tried out, I was like, this is cool. I'm going to be in a village working with women and children, probably serving alongside an ODA team, some Green Berets. Like that's what I thought CST was. And I knew that the demand signal was there because of the conservative nature of Afghan society and the inability for the joint force elements that were out operating to kind of tap into that other 50% of the population. But I was looking at it from very much I would say, stability operations type lens. I spoke to a retired general mentor the other day, and he's like, it's a 4-block war, right? Offense, defense, stability operations, and then DISCA. And
what's DISCA?
You're gonna defense, let's come back to that. I forget what it is.
No, it's fine. I get beat up sometimes in the comments like, hey, you guys talking all these military jargon codes. I don't know what you're talking about. So I try to ask a lot of acronym questions because I don't want get some of our listeners to get, kind of lost.
Yeah, it'll come to me.
That's fine. Don't worry about it.
So I kind of looked at it from the lens of like, I was thinking very much in terms of stability operations. And keep in mind, this is 2013. So we're a decade into the war, and the CST program's the first, they instituted the program in 2009. 2010 was when the first cohort deployed. So again, we're like a decade into the war, and Joint Force commanders are like, hey man, maybe we should try doing things like a little different. Maybe we should try to, engage the other half of the population here. And that's kind of the genesis of the program.
I kind of want to paint the picture for our listeners. And so, in Afghanistan and in Muslim cultures in general, like women don't talk, women are kind of subservient to men. And so, assault forces, special operations, doing direct action raids, doing village stability operations, we're hitting targets or interacting in these villages, and they're only talking to men, but women are everywhere. They're in the houses. They're in, they're in even some of these meetings. They're living with all these high level leaders, and they have access to all this information. And, nobody's talking to them because, by the cultural norms, Americans can't, talk to the American men can't talk to the women because it's like a cultural disrespect thing. And it could cause like, an uprising or a Taliban attack really. And so there really was, because to be honest with you, I didn't know tons about the cultural support teams until, you and I started talking. It wasn't something that came up during my time in service, but looking back, it totally makes sense. And so I just wanted to kind of paint that picture so people understand kind of where this idea was born from.
Right,
and then I'll let you kind of, dive into, on the backside when you actually get out of training as to kind of what you guys did. So kind of going back to training assessment, you go through assessment and selection. CST selection was grueling. Rucks, team tasks, mental tests. Can you kind of describe a moment that pushed your limits?
There was a ruck march we did, unknown distance. So we left. We knew what the end point was, but from where we left, we didn't know exactly how long that route was. Probably had an idea in our mind, but you go out and you're trying to move as fast as you can for as long as you can. And I remember I was pretty close to the front. There's some, again, really phenomenal athletes that come out for this thing. And some of them are like long distance runners and could just like power through some of these longer rucks. But I remember a teammate of mine, Cassie, coming up next to me. And I'm at the point where I'm like, okay, I moved as fast as I could for as long as I could. And now I'm like slowing down. And Cassie comes up and I hear her footsteps behind me, and you're like, all right. I don't want to get past, but this is that healthy competition thing, and competition drives excellence. And Cassie's like, Jess, let's go. Come on. We're almost there. We got to be almost there. We know this route. That pine tree looks familiar. If you've been anywhere outside the backside of Southern Pines, like, all right, you got a lot of dirt roads, got a lot of pines. I'm like, I don't know exactly where we are, but I do think we're close. And so, that moment of encouragement, again, another memory that just stands out like it was yesterday. And I hope everyone finds that in their life, someone that's going to push them the way that Cassie pushed me.
That's awesome. Thanks for sharing.
And we crossed the finish line together.
How much farther did you guys have?
Probably like definitely less than a mile. Oh. But and it felt like a long time, but it's like her pace, she's like the tortoise. Right. I'm the hare, she started out slow and would pick up at the end. So like by the time she met me, she made me better. I crossed the finish line way better than I would have because she kept the pace that I had previously been moving at. And so then with her, I was able to, close it out strong.
Nice, man. Good job, Cassie. How did bonding with other women, as you noted, kind of shape that experience for you?
I think, the Cassie example is a wonderful one, but, you can be in an environment where you're pushing each other and, everyone's not going to get selected, but there's no malice, right? You're all encouraging each other. And you come into your tents, and we all kind of slept in these, just, all your cots are lined up next to you. So you had like,
Big
I don't know,
GP
maybe
medium.
20 girls to a tent. And again, this is an A&S, and you're telling jokes, you're getting to know each other, and never in my life had I been surrounded by that many. I mean, I grew up with 4 sisters, so I did have a lot of women that I was surrounded with, but in a professional environment, I should say, never was I surrounded by so many women. And even in the Signal Corps, where there's, there are definitely more women than in other branches, I was still, usually one of a few, or one of one. Deployed in Iraq, I was the only female in my platoon, essentially. Now I was a platoon leader, but you just don't have that experience, or you don't have the opportunity to, feel like you're all. It's just a different kind of environment, and those bonds last forever. And I think we saw that. I don't want to get ahead of ourselves, but we saw that as well with the partner force that we trained as part of the cultural support team mission. And maybe part of it, it's because you have that profound purpose for accomplishing the mission, the same mission that the other task, the task force has that you're attached to. But there's just also this other, kind of unspoken, not mission, but purpose behind, like, empowering each other, and then the women that are oppressed overseas. That is a whole nother level of why that I think is really powerful. Yeah. And you see that in the tent at CST, or on the out rucking alongside your sisters.
That's awesome. How long was selection, roughly?
About 3 weeks, I think.
And then, like, do you remember how many people you started with? How many people got selected?
I should know those numbers, but no, the attrition rate was pretty high. And I'll think through that. I can't remember really.
Was there a lot of was there people quitting, or were people just getting non-selected?
There were some that quit, but I'd say more often it was non-selects.
Non-select.
Mm-hmm.
So you go on into your training pipeline. How long was that?
We did about a 3-4 month workup as a CST baseline course, which was held at the JFK Center at SWIC, and taught by Green Berets and Rangers. And then of course there was a cultural component there as well. So we were in Bank Hall, like right there on Fort Bragg. And then depending on whether you went village stability operations or direct action side, you would do an additional training embedded with the team that you were either going to deploy with, or on the direct action side, just additional really hard skills focused training with some of the guys from Ranger Regiment.
Can you explain kind of the difference for the CST program on what you were doing on village stability versus direct action?
Yeah, and actually at the end of the baseline course, you put your wish list, like, hey, which side do you want to go on? I actually wanted to go on the village stability operations side. To me, that was the mission that you were more embedded in local communities. And the direct action side was your night raids. Like, if I could just, very just plain language, sure. Hey, like, it's either you're working in the day out with the village, or you're raiding compounds at night. And the mission on that is much more kind of focused on the tactical question, search, tactical question, obviously provide, comfort where appropriate, and provide that critical information, intelligence back to the task force so that they can, make decisions off of it. And again, that it's not to say though that the village stability operation side, they also ended up, there were different units that would also do raids, and so would also do the direct action mission. So on the VSO side, you could sometimes get a little bit of both. On the direct action side, though, generally you're it's the night after night, or if you're on one of the there were day missions every once in a while, but for the most part, you're operating at night.
Training involved weapons, tactics, Afghan cultural skills. What was it like transitioning from the Signal Corps to doing DA stuff?
Huge. I mean, 180 really difference, but in the moment, you're taught everything that you need, to be able to be successful on target. And so it felt, well prepared. And I remember I looked back through my my notebook once, or not too long ago, from the selection, and it's like, this is how they talk on the radio. You're just, every little thing, that you're about to go into an environment that is highly kinetic, with an all-male team where they've been doing this for potentially years or multiple deployments. And so you do feel that weight and to really know your craft. And so I think we were all very studious, and we all took it, very, very seriously to be as, again, tactically and technically proficient and competent as we could, and trace that all the way back to, Jeremy Brown at ROTC, those things, matter. You got to be good at the basics. And I think the instructors that they had were phenomenal. And again, on the direct action side, we had we did some additional train up after the baseline course, and the majority of that was spent on the range. And we had some of the best marksmen training us how to be comfortable with our weapons.
Any funny or humbling moments on the range?
I'll give one, not necessarily on the range, but we were doing some medical training. And so when I was in this part of the course, my older sister was getting married, and I was the maid of honor. However, I was like, I don't know if I'm going to be able to get off training for this. And so my family had made a cardboard cutout of me that they were going to take to the wedding. And the CST OIC, the officer in charge at the time, Alex Horton, she was kind of running the program with some other folks from the command. And she went up to the other leader and was like, hey, I really think we need to let Jess take an evening off, or take a day off, so that she can go to her sister's wedding. And the response was, okay, she can do it, but only if she volunteers to have the MPA put up her nose during the medical training. And so Alex comes back, we're all doing the medical training, and she's like, okay, Jess, here's the deal. You're going to get to go to your sister's wedding, but you're the test. I mean, everyone gets to practice the the MPA on you.
And just so you know, the MPA it's a nasal pharyngeal airway. It's a tube. I had to do it when I went to
I was going to say, you probably can.
So you either lick it or grease it, and you literally shove it up your nose. Normally you do it when people are passed out. It's to keep their airway open during a medical event, but it's very uncomfortable.
So I'm on the table, right? And it's Jenny's actually in the shot as well, and she's laughing. We have it on video. But that was my sacrifice for getting to leave. And then luckily my family didn't have to use the cardboard cutout of me. I got to surprise, my family and show up for the wedding. And then my dad drove me straight back. Alex they met on the highway. I jumped out of that car, went back, and Alex took me right back, changed into my my cries, and got right back out on the range. So I didn't miss too much, but it was awesome that they let me do that.
Sounds like Alex was a good leader.
Yes, that's something that I always harken back on when you think about what matters. Like, what can you do for your soldiers or airmen, or the folks under your command, that shows that you care, you really care.
Yeah, so for all you leaders out there, I hope you guys paid attention to that last story, because those are the small things in life.
Yes.
Yeah, it's not I mean, I don't think it was a big move, you know what I mean? But it was something small. But that's an impact not only that you still remember to this day, but of course, like your sister will always remember you being there in the wedding. So, you know, for all you leaders out there, you know, take note of that. There's small things you can do in a leadership position for your subordinates that, you know, may not be that big of a deal to you or be small, but it could leave a lasting impact on the people that you lead.
And yeah, you said it so well. I think it's just the willingness to even ask. Don't be afraid to ask.
So you get through assessment and selection, A&S. You get through the pipeline course. How did you get assigned to DA, direct action?
Back to Alex. Alex pulled me to the DA side. She was like, "Yeah, we're gonna pull her over here." And you know, they had different criteria for how they matched teams up. And so generally, the practice was you were deployed as a pair. So 2 CSTs would go to Kunduz, Mez, Kandahar, you know, so you deploy and you then integrate with your teams there in country. And so, yeah, they made the decision that I would be on the direct action side. And then I ended up going, I was deployed as a kind of a solo CST just because the way the numbers worked out. And one of the girls ended up getting hurt. So I went up to northern Afghanistan and, you know, was able to serve both a special mission unit and then 375 as well. So I served on 2 different task forces up in the mountains.
Yeah. So, I mean, you get deployed to Kunduz. I know you're not going to say it. I'll say it. It's not a big secret. You were assigned to Delta Force. What is that like as a female going to a tier 1 special missions unit, as you know, this new role? Did you feel a lot of pressure?
I did. And, you know, I was very grateful to be integrated into an awesome, you know, team. And I'll get into that a little bit more. But my very first, you know, when I got there, you do a RIP, which is essentially when you turn over with the CST that was before you.
It's a relief and place for all out.
Yep. Yeah. And so I remember the very first mission was we had troops in contact. And so that was like, welcome to Afghanistan. You are now in the fight. And again, similar to the feeling of getting to Fort Bragg and knowing you're about to deploy, immediately going to Iraq, like here, it's just that feeling, but on hyperdrive, because you're outside the wall, you're engaging an enemy, and that was the very first mission.
So your first deployment, you guys were in a tick the first time you went out. What was that like?
I was with the headquarters element, so I still, even though I was like outside, like I still felt somewhat removed from it. Right, I could hear it. I could see, you know, flashes, but like I wasn't up close and personal to it. And so even in that moment, I still felt a little bit removed from it, but you kind of just rely on what you've been taught, and you go into a hyper focus, and you're just, you know, paying attention, being situationally aware. We ended up moving the CST that I was doing the RIP with. Again, we were with the headquarters element. We ended up moving closer after everything was cleared. And, you know, that was like the first time that I saw like a dead body. And, you know, I mean, that was all. So I remember that. But, you know, for me, it was like very just mission focused.
Did you get a chance to link up with that troop, or did you like literally do that on the fly in the RIP? Like, hey, I'm the new CST. Or did you get a chance to link up with them before you went overseas?
No, that was very much like, hey, my name's Jess. Yep, I'm going out with you tonight.
Oh, wow.
So, and that troop was ripping out at the same time that the other CST was. And so I had that one mission with them, and then the next one was with old George Frazier, who's up there with me in the picture.
Big boy. We love George. So the new troop comes in, and I mean, do you get integrated with them? How does that work?
this is why George is cool. So I'm going, you know, the new troops in, and how it was set up was, you know, we'd spend time, you know, you wake up kind of later in the afternoon, you spend time in the Joint Operations Center, the JOC, and you're either going out or you're not going out. You know, you figure that out kind of during pretty early on, sometimes later in the day, but on this particular day, it was the kind of the first mission that we were actually going out on with this new team. And so once you know that, you know the time you're meant to take off, so you backwards plan and you start getting ready however long you need for that. So I'm headed to what was my kit room, which was kind of not in the same building, but close to where the guys all got ready. And so with me in that kit room was an interpreter and our female tactical platoon counterparts. And so we would all get ready in there, and then we'd meet the guys out on the flight liner to load the birds. And as I'm walking to the female kit room, George Fraser, who was senior enlisted at the time for that troop, was like, CST, where are you going? I was like, I'm going to go get ready, you know, gearing up. And he's like, get your stuff, come over here. I'm like, oh, over there? And he's like, yes. So I go in, grab all my kit out of my cubby, and I like walk it over to where the guys get ready, and, you know, nervously kind of like walk in. I'm like, okay, here I am. He's like, you're getting ready in here. And that was an example of inclusive leadership, right? Because he was like, hey, you need to know all the same information. Things change. Like as we're getting out on the mission or getting ready to get on the birds, like you need to be here so that you understand everything that we all know as we, you know, go out on that bird. He's like, I don't care if you get dressed in here, if you want to get dressed over there, come over here. But, you know, you will be in this kit room pre-mission. And that set, I think, the tone for that entire team. And yeah, they didn't all necessarily like it at first. I'm sure, you know, George got some, you know, questions of, you know, people coming to him like, really, girl in the kit room, you know, but at the end of the day, you know, there wasn't a reason why I shouldn't be.
What did that mean to you? What was your leader? I mean, I'll ask you in a second about your personal takeaway from that. I know the answer, but what was your leadership takeaway from that? Because that's huge. Again, it's another leadership lesson. But like, what was the leadership takeaway from you?
I think on a kind of a grander, just the way that George views the world, and I think a lot of us see it the same way. Hey, it doesn't matter what your gender is, doesn't matter color of your skin, doesn't matter your background. Like, you're here to do a job. You show up and you demonstrate character, competence, commitment. That's what I'm looking for. And that is America, right? Like, that's what our nation was founded on, that industrious, you know, agency to say, hey, I can rise above my station because I'm afforded equal access to opportunity. And so George just demonstrated that in a very, you know, small, maybe large act, you know, to say, hey, no, she's one of us. She's part of this team. And I think that's something that, again, I've tried to practice and incorporate in my leadership style as I, you know, continued in my profession, was just like include all the players. We all play a role. Everyone's valuable at different times of the mission. And as long as they're demonstrating those attributes and they're showing up and performing, you know, you give them the benefit of the doubt and you encourage them. And
yeah, because bullets don't care whether you're a male or female.
Right.
Bullets don't discriminate. Like, oh, you know, the enemy doesn't care whether you're a male or a female. You're wearing an American uniform with an American flag on your assault vest, and you're liable to the same danger. So Good on you, George Fraser. George Fraser's become a very good friend of mine as well. We'll see him on this podcast soon. His leadership insights are pretty phenomenal, and I look forward to bringing some of that to the world as well. But what a great story. I mean, on the personal side, as a female working in a tier 1 special operations unit, there is this stigma. What did that mean to you personally for him to say, hey, you're part of the team, you're going to be here? You know what I mean? Like, obviously George knew bullets don't discriminate. What did that mean to you personally?
I felt responsibility, like again, like a weight or a pressure, to perform, and I was grateful to have that type of leadership, because again, that didn't happen across all the other CST outstations. Like, not everyone had arms welcoming, arms wide open kind of experience. And I wouldn't even say there was arms wide open. There were still, things that I, had to demonstrate to really be fully kind of integrated on the team. But to me, it was just like, yep, that's my charge. I better, now he's really given me this opportunity. I better show up, and I better, take that responsibility.
Yeah, because you don't want to let George down.
Yeah, nope.
Deployed solo to conduits with Delta, and then Mazar-e Sharif with the 75th Ranger Regiment. You integrated into both of those elite units. Did you see like a big difference between how the Rangers operated and how the other unit operated?
I think the not a huge difference, but the Ranger Regiment has younger soldiers, right? And there's I love, some of the guys would always say it's like the best place to grow up in the Army. And I think perhaps maybe a way to put it is like there may be a little more structure in regiment, just because again, there's when you're getting to Delta, like you have more years under your belt, more reps, right? More experience, whether you're coming out of an ODA or regiment,
and a little more maturity.
And a little more maturity. So I think perhaps there's maybe a little more structure in the way regiment would approach some of the mission planning. Again, they're grooming a lot of these younger team leaders and squad leaders, versus on the other side of the coin. Like, again, there's a lot of experience there. There's still structure, don't get me wrong, but maybe it's just a little more fluid, or maybe it's you don't see it as clearly in the same way.
That's big boy rules.
Yeah,
it's a lot more. And again, man, I mean, with the Rangers, like, again, another premier assault force. We've had plenty of Rangers on here, but again, you can be an 18-year-old kid coming straight out of basic training and up in the Ranger Regiment, and so I think that structure is definitely needed. I spent some time, working with a unit, and I always go back and watch Black Hawk Down, and man, that movie definitely depicted the difference between the Ranger Regiment and Delta Force and how they work together and operate. I was in a forward deployed base in Mosul where we had both on the compound, and I got to see it firsthand. The Ranger dudes are running around in full uniform, high and tight haircuts, shaved. Delta Force dudes walk around in shorts, flip flops, and got a rope around their waist for a belt, and it's just the difference. Both absolutely phenomenal units, premier at what they do, but it's interesting to hear your take, because I saw some of those similar things. How did proving yourself in combat, as you mentioned, kind of change team dynamics for you?
Anytime you integrate on an elite team, you're having to prove yourself, whether you're the whatever kind of enabler you are, whether even you're one of the operatives. You still have to you always have to perform. And not to say that I executed every mission perfectly. I mean, there were times where I was like, dang, I could have done this a little better. And we should all be like that. We should always be reflecting on that to continue to improve. But I think at the end of the deployment, I knew that I had gained, both teams that I worked with, gained their trust. And because of that, guys were willing to mentor me, to bring me out to do extra training at the range, or, medical training, radio training. And I always said yes to that, and I always appreciated that. But I think part of that was on me, like showing that I was willing to learn and that I wanted to learn. And then on them, recognizing that, like, hey, I actually really want to do well here. And they responded to that as well. So I think throughout the deployment, as that trust grew, you have those opportunities to really learn from these guys,
Giants,
yeah, and they become friends more than just teammates. And I've stayed in touch with a lot from both sides, and can reach out to him today. George, of course, is the one example. He's family.
What kind of was your mission? Like, what did you actually do on these raids where you went out?
Yeah, mission was to engage the women and children on target. And so sometimes there weren't any women and children on target, and we can get to that, but ultimately bring the women and children to a safe area. So court on them, be able to control, that environment a little bit, and then go through, some standard, questions, again, tactical questioning, and searching to identify threats to the task force, to identify things like, hey, are we at the right compound? Perhaps to pull phones, things like that, off target that would help us on the collection side to determine if we were at the right compound, and all of that just informed the decision cycle for the ground force commander, and that could come to fruition a couple different ways. On one mission, that we were able to understand from the women and children that we were not at the right compound, that we essentially were able to redirect the task force to the right compound and find who we were looking for. On another mission, this wasn't one of mine, I like to tell this story about Jenny. She when she was talking to women and children, found out where one of the adversary's weapons caches was, so she was able to lead the task force to that weapons cache. On the village stability operation side, you had these incredible stories from the women who were working in the villages and just gaining access to things that the task force would have never had access to. So one example, the women, the CSTs, were invited to a wedding in this local village, and for a long time they had been trying to find this one target, and during the wedding celebrations, the CSTs came back and they're like, yeah, he's here. We learned that, from the women. So again, women may not have like a huge outside the house or a role outside the house in Afghanistan, but even in conservative societies, they have influence in the family, and they're flies on the wall, and they know everything. They know things, and they talk. And so another, cool story from one of the VSO teams, they delivered a baby. Oh, wow. They went out. There was a stranded couple that needed help, and they had been they had been communicating with the village for so long, like, hey, if this ever happens, like we have medical support, we can provide that kind of care if needed. Well, it's late. It's like their last night, actually, before they redeployed. They get a call like, hey, we have this couple, they were trying to get to the hospital, and the wife's in labor, can you help? And so without a military vehicle, they probably wouldn't have been able to retrieve that mother. She successfully delivered the baby, and the next day those two CSTs redeployed back to the States. So a lot of it is kinetic, and you think about like it's hunting, right? But then it's also bringing life into the world. Like, so you have these two very different.
It's the human side,
right? And you're able to be a part of both sides of that. And war is a paradox, right? So there's a lot of stories like that in between the seams that are just pretty incredible impact. You may never know exactly what the result of that same mission was, or what the result of those two CSTs helping deliver that baby, but there's definitely a ripple effect for sure.
There was a mission that I think you and I talked about where you went out with some Australian forces, where, women provided critical intel. Was an absolute CST success. Can you kind of walk us through that night in detail?
Yeah, that was one really chaotic. And I remember actually, because we would do a call out. So the way that at this point in the war, like that we'd approach these compounds is, we'd get security set up, and then you're essentially using like a megaphone, right, to ask people to come out of their houses
politely,
please.
Yeah. And just so the listeners know what happened later, like early on in the war, the tier 1 guys would do DA. So basically they go to the front door, either explosive breach or kick the door, drop flashbangs, run through the house. The enemy figured out our tactics, techniques, and procedures. They started placing IEDs in the walls and the doors. They would figure out where guys were going to do vehicle dismounts, set up IEDs. I remember in 0809, I was with the task force. They, turned the phone on, wait for the assault task force, and took out the entire assault force at VDO. So as the war progressed, being Americans and understanding warfare, we progressed as well. And so they would do what's called surround and call outs. So just like, you would say, they would surround the whole area, call people out, sometimes send EOD dogs or whatever. I just want to give the listeners, just a little bit of background. So, sorry to interrupt you. But.
No. And the other, I think, good thing for context too, which you triggered, was the fact that at this point in the war as well, we're training a partner force. And so there's the Afghan special forces that were on target with us, the male unit, and then the equivalent of the CST program, we called it the female tactical platoon. So you had Afghan women that we were, training as part of that program as well. So on this, mission, again, you've got U.S. and Afghan special forces. I was with, again, my interpreter and then one of the Afghan females. And so that was, who I was responsible for when we would, get on the bird and get off and move towards the compound. And I remember this wasn't one that was like remote. There were two compounds kind of right next to each other. And when we initially, George called me up, CST, come forward. So I'd come up, and I was kind of in like the fatal funnel, if you will, like as the women and children were being asked to like come out of the house. And, I remember thinking to myself, like, move with purpose, move fast, like get out of the way. And a lot of times you have to be kind of forceful because like it's the middle of the night. They can't see, you're under nods. And so I remember George, he was kind of emphasizing like, get the women, so I'm like grabbing the women and children out of this, what could be a very, again, dangerous area.
Can you explain what a fatal funnel is?
Really where you're just, there's an open doorway, and it's a point of vulnerability, I guess, a point of risk, because we can't see beyond that doorway, but from the inside, if we don't move the, try to protect the civilian, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to protect these civilians. Guys, So we need to get them out of that kind of funnel so that then, we can ensure that we're not putting civilians at risk or our own task force at risk. I don't know if you want to add to that, if that.
No, I mean, that's exactly what a fatal funnel is. So, and you have, it's doorways, hallways, it's anywhere where you stand long enough for somebody shooting out that front door. It's an easy kill. So, you're definitely going right in the middle of, harm's way. The house isn't cleared yet. So,
right. And so the women, they come off, I get them kind of situated. We're kind of postured along the compound wall, and immediately start, there's some questions you want to really kind of get out as soon as possible. And for this particular mission, identifying if we were at the right house, like who lives here, that was one of the first things that we asked. And we that line of questioning, I had a phenomenal interpreter. So like, part of this isn't like me just being good at what I do. Like my interpreter was incredible. And so a lot of times I didn't have to, we would practice the night, like going out on the mission. Like we knew she knew as well as I did exactly what we needed to get off the target, like what kind of questions we wanted to prioritize. A lot of times I'd be more focused on the searching, and I'd let her, because she was so capable, kind of run, we'd practice the questions, but I'd let her kind of run the line of questioning. So in her own follow-up, she identified that we were not at the right compound, and that the actual person we were looking for was at the compound right next to us. And so immediately radioed that up to George, the task force leadership. They were able to do what they needed to do, and that was a successful night that we celebrated with the Aussies that night later, after safely coming back to the FOB.
So again, man, I mean, just proving, how that CST program and how we had, progressed in this asymmetrical threat. That's information we would have never got, or, possibly would have never been able to obtain. So, I mean, that's pretty cool. Any other, I think there was a madrasa mission. You want to tell me about that one too?
Yeah, I'll that was actually my last mission, my very last mission. So I had, we prepped, we get out to, this compound, ends up being a madrasa. For those who aren't aware, it's a Islamic school. And so, no women on the target, but a lot of young boys. And I had kind of completed all my questioning and searching and questioning. And they ranged from anywhere probably from like 7 to 14 years old. And there were over a dozen of them. And at the end of the mission, one of the CST responsibilities was to do a key leader engagement. And part of that was kind of breaking down cultural barriers that, again, there's all these kind of other things that the program probably supported that are hard to measure, like the impact or the effect of. But, they wanted a female to engage with these male, like the eldest male on the compound. And I would basically record if there was anything broken or damaged in the night raid, that way that they could go get compensated for it. And so I'm sitting there with the imam at the end of the mission, and somehow we get into a theological conversation, and he's asking me, if I believe in Jesus. And, through the interpreter, I told him, like, yes, I do. But in America, we believe in freedom of religion. And, he proceeded to tell me that I was an infidel and that this war would never end. And so as I walked back to the helicopter, in my head, I just thought about all those young, impressionable young boys that were being taught, hey, this is the one way to think about the world. And at that point, I was like, man, we've got to break this cycle of violence by investing more in the next generation and investing in education. And that's, where you're able to really translate, tactical wins that we were seeing in Iraq and Afghanistan, wherever, we tactically we were winning, but how do you translate that to operational and strategic success? And I think part of that is making sure that you have a game plan for the next generation. And maybe that's a little bit of the State Department, that's maybe outside the scope of the military's mission, but as a national security apparatus, thinking bigger strategic picture, I think those are the things that we can, improve.
Yeah, absolutely. Before we dive in a couple other questions on the CST thing, can you talk to me a little bit about the, like the Afghan CST program? I mean, that's something I actually didn't really consider.
The female tactical platoon, essentially, again, is a mirror image of the CST program. And they would be doing these missions for way longer than we would as CSTs, right? Because they're living it. So talk about a bunch of, badass women that are, committed to improving their country, committed to seeing a better future for, their families and their kids. And so they raised their hands and they said, yeah, we want to be part of this. The training for them, primarily happened in Kabul, and so two of the CSTs or some of the CSTs for each rotation would be responsible for essentially running these Afghan women through kind of a similar pipeline to what we went through, and regiment helped out with that as well. But these women would again deploy alongside the Afghan Katejas, the special forces, the American special forces, for months on end, years on end in some cases. And so they had, a lot of experience under their belts for sure. And they were, a lot of them were from Hazara or Uzbek community. So Afghanistan, for those that don't know, is very, tribal. And so these women, fast forward to when we withdrew, one, they were a ethnic minority. Two, they were women, and then three, they had worked with the U.S. Special Forces, so they were like an extreme target when at risk when the Taliban took back over after the withdrawal. And again, not to jump ahead, but part of what the CST community did at that time was really come together as a network and successfully and safely got our female tactical platoon counterparts out of Afghanistan.
Oh, we're definitely going to talk about the withdrawal later on.
Yeah.
When you were there, were they living with you during your deployment? So did the female Afghan CSTs live with you?
We lived on separate parts of the compound, but we would work out together. I taught, Sarah and Joita, my two FTPs, we would run, taught them how to do a deadlift, we would listen to music, share music, and eat together. We'd go to sometimes the local bazaar or whatnot. And so that was a really neat experience to, kind of hear their stories again, all through the interpreter. And again, mine was an American citizen, actually Afghan American, and she's phenomenal. And so I kind of mentioned it earlier. You have this shared purpose of getting after the enemy, creating a better future, in Afghanistan, protecting U.S. interests at home as well, for Americans. And the other bit of that, though, was this overcoming that oppression of women in Afghanistan. And, a lot of times, in the U.S., we forget, we think, I'm unable to do this, or like no one in the U.S. experiences real oppression. Like go overseas, watch and observe what happens to women under the Taliban who are stoned to death or murdered for what? Wanting to divorce her husband or something so simple. And so that is that again, that whole other thread and that bond that you create with doesn't matter what culture you're from, what your background is, but you have a kind of a special
it's definitely the human side of it.
Yeah.
How were the Afghan tactical females received by the Afghan commandos?
I'd say it depends. And again, do you have a leader like a George Fraser that's going to be open-minded and think like, how does this make me a more lethal fighting force? Or do you have someone that's stuck in their own ways and it's like, nope, conservative, this woman doesn't belong anywhere close to, the fight. I'd say we as Americans led by example, and time on target broke down some of those barriers with some of those, more conservative men that were, serving alongside the American forces, and seeing the CSTs and the FTPs go out together and really help in a really, meaningful way get after those operational objectives. There was definitely still, though, there's nuances with the various teams. So, for example, I was always invited to go out and play soccer. And so we'd play soccer on the flight line, with the Afghan Katejas, the Americans. And because I'm a white woman, that's like totally cool. But I I had asked at one point, I remember I had asked my interpreter or the FTPs if they wanted to go, and they were like, oh no, we can't go. That wouldn't be allowed. Like, you're allowed to go do that because you're white. You're like a different, they're going to treat you differently. And
how was that mental gymnastics processing that? I know you, so
sometimes I just like blow past. I'm like, come on, let's just, if they don't like it, oh well. You have to sometimes take baby steps though, even though you want to like get to the end goal, which is, again, everyone's treated with dignity and respect, equal access to opportunity, but like sometimes it takes like some baby steps. And so showing up every day again and performing is what helps break down those barriers. And I was the FTPs that I had, some perform better than others, but and some are more fit than others. Like there's a lot of again, investment in training and some that would get them to the point where they were able to kind of operate. The goal was for them to be able to operate independently, obviously without us. One day we're all going to be gone and they're going to be able to go out and do this mission without us. So, we definitely saw improvements and progress, over the course of the entirety of the CST program. So from, 2009, it, lasted till the withdrawal. And the FTPs truly became, a force that was well integrated. And you saw some of them move from military positions in the military to positions in government. So when you look at, hey, what are some of those things that are maybe hard to measure? You're starting to see, women advance that role, not just in uniform, but in policy and in other decision-making areas. So
that's kind of cool to see that growth, I'm sure, for you, and being a small piece of that at that time. But I'm sure that added to your frustration with the withdrawal, which we'll cover on the backside of your story. Any other, CST missions that kind of left a mark, engagements, whatever, anything that kind of sight, sound, smells, anything that you like just really left a mark on you from that deployment?
There's one other one that, and actually this is like an example of where I felt like I could have done better. And so we had a mission. We hit 2 different compounds, and the first compound that we went to ended up being where our guy was, but we weren't able to identify that. And so we went to a second compound, and ended up having to do a RANA, remain overnight, and exfil the next morning, just because we had, elongated time to try and get to try and accomplish this mission. And on the first compound, this was pretty early on in my deployment. On the first compound, there weren't women, but there were some young boys, and I was able to, kind of question them a little bit. And after we had left the compound and came back home and realized that the person we were looking for was at that first compound, I always thought, like, okay, what else could I have asked? Like, what else could have made this young kid tell me that's where, the bad guy was? And I guess I tell that story to say there's, self-assessment, always trying to improve. We're never going to get it 100%, right all the time, but especially in this environment of, working with elite units, like, you always got to be refining your particular, the particular role you play. And I think if you're always looking to improve and get better, it's a good recipe for success. And to do that, you have to sometimes, face, like, you got to do your AARs, your after action reviews, and have honest and candid conversations with yourself and sometimes your peers or your teammates on, hey, what went right, what went wrong, and what can we do to improve next time.
And I think the moment you stop doing that in life is the moment that you settle and you maybe die inside, really. I think if you stay on that path of always what could I do better? How could I be better? Whether it's be a better human, a better person, a better friend, a better father, whatever. And I think the moment you stop doing that is the moment you really start sucking in life. At least for those that,
Well said.
Want to succeed, and whether you're in the military and then you leave the military and you become a parent, or, you run a business or a nonprofit or whatever, man. I think that's the constant. And I think that's what differentiates people, successful people, like I think if you look at a lot of successful people in life, you find that they're always assessing, to your point. How can I be better? How can I be a better leader? How can I run this company better? How can I be a better parent? I tell people a lot, I don't give marriage advice and parenting advice because I was never good at either, but I'll tell you everything I failed at, and maybe my failure will help you become a better, X, Y,
But you're
Z.
100% right. Yeah. It translates to all areas of life.
Great point, Jess. Thanks for sharing that. Before we kind of close out your CST deployment, I want to talk a little bit about Jenny Moreno. Jenny was a CST that you went through assessment and selection on the pipeline with. Jenny was with the Ranger Regiment in 2013 down in southern Afghanistan in Kandahar, and was tragically killed during a combat operation. I know she's super important to you. I'd love to talk about her for a little bit if you're willing.
Yeah, humbled. I was humbled and very grateful to know Jenny as a friend and teammate. There's a quote that she had on her whiteboard in Kandahar that I think captures kind of who she is as a person. And it is, be strong when you are weak, be brave when you are scared, be humble when you're victorious, and be badass every day. And this shirt that I have on the inside, it has written in loving memory of Captain Jenny Moreno, Sergeant Patrick Hawkins, Specialist Cody Patterson, and Sergeant Joseph Peters, who were all killed in action that night, 6 October 2013. And it's got the quote, be badass every day. It's made by a company based out of San Diego, some SEALs, but that's okay.
we won't hold that against you.
We won't hold it against them. But the memorial quote is so that you see it every day when you put the shirt on. And it's just a reminder of, hey, I'm going to live life to the fullest today. And that's the promise that I made her in the eulogy that I gave, the eulogy that we had up in Condu's. And, again, promise to live this life fully in her memory and for all those who have sacrificed for, the freedoms we enjoy every day. And so, I met her in selection. We were standing next to each other at the start of the PT test, about to run our 2 miles together. And she's real small, and she can run. And she was just a bubbly personality. She's a nurse. And so it was kind of unique for a nurse to, volunteer for the CST program, but then also be selected for the direct action side. She was the first nurse that was, kind of aligned with that mission set. And I remember sitting next to her. We had already successfully gone through A&S together, and then we were in the baseline course together. And it was at the end of that where they made additional, cuts. We made it through, and then they told us, hey, here's where you're going. And I remember she was really surprised when she found out that she'd be on the direct action side, but she was also eager to accept, that challenge. And again, she was just always looking for a way to really give back even deeper, even more, and when the mission that she was on was an IED maker that they were, going after. There were threats that this particular cell was going to attack civilians, and the task force, again, she was with Ranger Regiment, went out and it was a very chaotic mission. They had daisy chained IEDs around the compound. The couple that was initially kind of called out of the compound, a male and a female. I always remind people women can also be adversaries. So another reason to, address that other 50% of the population. There was a suicide vest. The female, had a suicide vest on. And again, just the fog of war, as Clausewitz would put it, kind of took place that evening. But Jenny being a nurse, was on the outside of the fray and ran into the chaos because she was a nurse and she knew that she might be able to, provide some of that life-saving care. And that was a conscious decision. And, in that act, which is a purest form of altruism, right? That's why we're our nonprofit that we kind of made in legacy, as a living legacy in honor of Ashley White, in honor of her, in honor of all those, again, who have raised their right hand and have sacrificed, to disregard your own personal well-being and run into the fray. And unfortunately, it was a pressure plate IED that detonated, and she was killed in the blast. And again, alongside 3 other Americans, gave all that night. So that's Objective Aries, and Guerrera, the name of the docu series that we later produced years later, is named in honor of Jenny, and it means female warrior in Spanish.
That's awesome. Yeah, I talked to Tom Block, who was there on that target. I think he's coming on in the future, and I relived that incident with him, and to your point, there was tons of people injured that night. We lost some actually war fighters, but Jenny, there's been this debate in the last couple of years about women in combat and infantry units and whatever, and I think like this story in and of itself puts a lot of that to rest. You know what I mean? I think Jenny and Ashley and some of those kind of really proved, with their life, right? Like, can women do it? Well, I think they proved that they can do it. You know what I mean? And represented our nation, their families, and everybody else, but they represented this nation to the fullest, right? And so I think that's an awesome. The documentary, and we're going to cover that here in a little bit, is just phenomenally made. It's an awesome tribute to her. I hope anybody that listens to this podcast goes and watches that documentary. It's 3 episodes, and it's phenomenally made. It's a great tribute to her, but also to the program, to what you guys did. You'll see George's smiling face in there talking in the documentary. You'll see Tom in there and a couple other people as well. How did Jenny's loss affect you?
In the moment, I remember I was in my sleep tent, whatever. We weren't out on mission that night, so I was at a different location than Jenny, and we had just recently chatted, on the Skype chat. You talked to all the different CSTs at the different outstations, and the mission I had mentioned earlier, that was one she had relayed to me, like, and I don't, we'd check in with each other, and I just got so again, we weren't on mission that night, but one of my Ranger teammates kind of came and knocked on the tent door, which is much of a door, but it was like, hey, there's something going on, you might want to come into the jock. And I remember going through and cycling through, like, something must have gone wrong, and I just knew. And we're all affected, and our family, of course, is affected. But I think, it's not the first and won't be the last service member, to die for the country, or to, when you think first responders to firefighters, police force, law enforcement. So how do you channel that service-oriented mindset? How do you channel that loss into something that can inspire, that can empower the next generation? I think truly that's the genesis of Altru, our nonprofit, and the genesis of Guerrera. I don't know. Sometimes I get emotional, sometimes I don't, but ultimately I've had a really great group of friends and family. You know, all the CSTs were all incredibly close when you have a loss like that with both Ashley and Jenny as well. You know, it's you have that support system, and I couldn't be more grateful for that. But all of us, you know, it's like, hey, what do we do with this? Because you know, you can't dwell on it. There's always going to be a little bit of you missing, you know, and again, for those that knew her well way better than I did, or her family, and um, um, again, Hawkins and Peters and Patterson and all those who we've lost. I guess my take on it, and a lot of those in our community, was just channel it into something, you know, as positive as possible, and share the values that she embodied, the values that Ashley embodies, the values that Shannon Ken embodies, that, and share that with the next generation so that they feel like, hey, I too am gonna live this life, you know, to the fullest. And one of the awesome things about Jenny is she was so humble. She wrote in her journal about the guys that she was deployed with, and she was like, you know, they do this day in and day out. They do this over multiple deployments. You know, she was always like, just in awe of that dedication, that commitment. And you know, it's just like when you like pull yourself out of it, right? And you like look at what she's doing, you're like, yeah, you too. Like you too. You demonstrate that same courage. And I hope that through Guerrera and the activities in the nonprofit, like there's going to be some young girl or some young guy that's going to say, that's the type of person that I want to be. I want to have that. I want to think about other people other than myself. I want to give back. I want to be the best version of myself that I can be. And I think there's a lot of us. I know you have friends as well that embody that. So the more that we can share that message, I think the better we'll be as a nation. You know, big picture, but then also just in our individual lives, you know, as well, and having that, you know, fulfillment and purpose in life.
Very eloquent, Jessica. Thank you.
No, thank you.
Kind of closing out your CST, you know, that deployment, and you know, that loss. You know, what was that transition like coming back, you know, to Fort Bragg, and really having to process all that? Both, you know, from my understanding, the CST program, you know, for you and your career was a one deployment thing. Was that way for everybody?
For the most part, yes, because it was, you know, a temporary assignment with U.S. Army Special Operations Command. Some CSTs did do multiple rotations, or in the case if you were the officer in charge, you know, like Alex, we talked about earlier, you know, she stayed in the program, and the OIC that replaced her stayed in the program for, you know, like almost a decade, or not a decade, like 5-6 years. And so for me, I knew I had a taste of the special operations community. I knew I wanted to get back there eventually. But as you know, I was first lieutenant. I think I was just getting promoted captain. You know, when I got back, I went right back to my signal unit on Fort Bragg, and you know, I knew I wanted to be a company commander, and I wanted to have that, you know, leadership experience. Mm-hmm. And so I started kind of reaching out to my branch manager at the time. I had the experience at the Tactical Expeditionary Signal Battalion. Obviously, the deployment in Iraq was kind of more of that strategic signal mission. And so I reached out and I said, hey, I'd really be interested in doing a strategic communicator assignment. And I learned about the Wideband Satellite Operations Center, which is called WizHawk. And it's the only signal battalion that was under 1st Space Brigade and then Space Missile Defense Command. It's now Space Force. They've lifted up the entire battalion, and it's now Space Force, part of Space Force.
But I know that Space Force is like this new command, and it's super cool, but I cannot help but think every time I hear Space Force, I think of the movie Spaceballs, man. I don't know why that is, but that's just what it triggers for me. I know it's very strategic, and I know it's like a very like unique mission, but that's kind of always where my brain goes. Did you go to the Captain Careers course before you went to Europe?
No, actually. So this goes back to, and this is how I would mentor any young junior officer. This, like, sometimes the Army or the Air Force or the Marines, sometimes it happens to you. Sometimes you pave your path. And so I was expecting to go to Signal Captain's Career Course, but I had reached out to my branch manager ahead of time, and I had talked to some of my mentors in my current unit, and I just wanted to understand what command opportunities were going to be open after the career course. Well, it turns out that WISOC needed a company commander like time now. And so I interviewed with the battalion commander, and I, at least didn't mess it up too bad because they offered me the position ahead of career course. So I actually went out to Germany. The command was based out of Colorado Springs, and I had another remote away from the flagpole assignment, which I always seem to find those ones. Which
lucky you.
And went out, and our mission at that site, 24/7 operations, was to do primarily payload and transmission control. So what that means is, hey, you've got guys and gals on the ground, and they're sending commands essentially to space-based assets, satellites, to either enable communications for thousands of users, or to maneuver the satellite in a way that could protect those communications. And there's all kinds of cool stuff that I learned while there. And, I even went to a space course. I got my space badge. Everyone's like, what the heck is that thing? But, it's really interesting to see how, you think it's like, what is space? What is this capability? What does it mean? But because I had come from the cultural support team program and kind of saw that real, tactical level operations, I was able to draw the dots between that strategic space-based capability all the way down to the warfighter and say, hey, this is exactly how it impacts operations on the ground. And so for my soldiers, one of the things that I tried to impress on them was that, yeah, you may feel like you're far removed from the fight, but I promise you, someone is relying on you doing your job really well. And it's going to be the difference sometimes between life or death.
Shoot, move, and communicate. And sometimes you can't move, you can't communicate, can't get a medevac, can't find your target.
Yep. And all the other the command lines for example, for MQ-9s, for drones, right? That rides satellite communications infrastructure. So do you want to be able to, I think back to objective areas, that target. We want to soak that target with ISR prior to going out on it. If we don't have command line, if we don't have those communication lines up, if we're not able to have that pre-mission soak, do we know as much about the target as we would want to or as we should? So there's all kinds of things that I was able to, bring to that command that I hope, made those young soldiers feel like they were really doing something important, even though sometimes you forget about it because you're just day in, day out doing on the keys and not deployed.
And just so people know, soaking a target with ISR, what she's talking about is when you're going to let's say do a direct action raid on a big compound that could be full of bad guys, you can send a drone out ahead of time and soak the area, or get sight, sound, thermal, whatever, to really see who's there, who's moving, which gives an assault element, an absolute advantage before they hit the target. So very important, not only capability, but to your point, if the drone can't talk to the assault force, or you can't control the drone, you don't have that asset. Now you have an assault force that's in the blind that could eat IEDs, take out an assault force, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a huge capability. There's something that, you kind of taught me about, kind of as we were prep and as we've been talking, the special operations, so SOF, Special Operation Forces, the SOF Space Cyber Triad, which is, that's something I hadn't heard before. Can you kind of like dive into that, what that means and kind of how that like translates?
Yeah, the SOF Space Cyber Triad, a lot of people are like, oh, that's just buzzwords. I am a firm believer that there is a lot of overlap between folks on the ground, special operations particularly, whether that's behind enemy lines, everywhere that SOF has, global kind of presence, leveraging that ground access, if you will, and tying it into space and cyber capabilities. And essentially that's what the triad means. It's like, how do we leverage these different, the access of SOF and then, the technological capabilities that are in space and cyber to either protect or to exploit, adversaries' capability. And I'll put it into context with a funny story because I think that makes it like easier for people to understand, because everyone's like, space, yeah, what does that mean? What do you mean? How is the Green Beret gonna support, something in space? But one caveat to space, there's the ground, and I learned this from the great leadership I had when I was at this command. He would always break it down. Hey, there's a ground segment, there's a transmission segment, and there's a space segment, and it's all connected. So space could mean that there's a target on the ground, or that you have to protect something on the ground. It could mean that you're protecting the transmission layer, the EW, kind of the waves, if you will. It doesn't always have to mean like you're up in space in a little satellite vehicle, like, tinkering with a satellite. Like that doesn't necessarily mean like that's the effect that you're having. So as a in command, I'd check on my guys on the weekends every once in a while. Again, they're on 24/7 ops. And one of the weekends I was like, you know what? I'm going to go in, I'm going to make some tacos. And I'm going to bring tacos to the ops floor. And the kitchen is right outside the ops floor. And I burnt the shit out of some tortillas. And so my family's all great cooks. I'm like the one that they're like, you just slice manchego and make a meat and cheese plate. Like, don't do anything else. Anyway, so I was testing my skills at taco making and failed miserably, burnt some tacos. Little did I know that the alarm that tripped also was somehow tied to, I'm going to call it a flux capacitor because I don't remember what the name of it was, but essentially we had this massive earth terminal outside the op center, and it tracks this satellite that happens to provide communications for 6th Fleet. And the flux capacitor, if you will, that's on this massive earth terminal got tripped with the fire alarm going off. So I basically sabotaged my own op center by burning tacos. And I remember Sergeant Copenhaver, love that guy. He was like, ma'am, what the heck? He's so professional and so good at his job. He was like in charge of the ops floor that night. And he's like, we've got 6th Fleet calling. Like, for real, I was on the phone now with, luckily they have their PACE plan. They have different means of communication, but they were calling the ops center to be like, hey, what the heck? Get our comms back up. What happened? So I now have all the guys on the floor running through all these different, contingency plans to get things back online. But it was all because somehow the fire alarm also tripped the, that little piece of the piece that allowed the Earth terminal to track the satellite was broken.
6th Fleet, for all you guys out there, there's like an entire naval fleet for the U.S., like destroyers and the whole 9 yards. So, but I'm a visual person, man, so I can just see like ships in the Mediterranean or the Gulf, also they can't talk, and I'm watching you like tacos burning in a microwave or something. That's wild, man. Yeah.
So again, that funny story, but if you like, use your creativity, like how do we defend our space-based capability that's on the ground our cyber capability that's on the ground, and then how can we also offensively, use that, and me sabotaging our op center. Potential example.
I bet you they got that breaker fixed.
Yeah,
so
they're like, hey, maybe we should get the fire department
Yeah.
in here and figure out how not to connect these two things.
Exactly. How did that, just being able to see, communications at such a high strategic level, how did that like impact you, later on when you were doing mission plan and your next assignment, or just understanding that capability as it pertains to, other aspects of, irregular warfare, I guess?
I think the fortunate opportunity I had to have, again, tactical, operational, like strategic kind of experience pretty early on in my, military career. It's more of a mindset that you then apply to any type of operational planning. Like, you're always nested with a higher mission, right? You're always going to nest with at the top level, like the national security strategy. Like, hey, what's going on in the world that the national security apparatus cares about, and how does that funnel down into the, to the Department of Defense, to geographic combatant commanders or functional combatant commanders, where they're saying, hey, these are our priorities. This is essentially our operational, objectives. So you're always kind of thinking like, when you see it in practice, like I did, from being a ground tactical communicator, doing CST, strategic comms, like I always went into mission planning in any future assignment with, okay, who's at the top of the food chain? Again, the president, NSS, national security strategy. But like, how does what I'm doing down here or here nest with that larger kind of, strategic vision? And there's so much in the geopolitical space that, when we think about the status of Afghanistan right now, like the strategic thinkers, the military needs really strong strategic thinkers, strategic leaders. And I think I had a front row seat to that, just in a very small kind of microcosm, if you will, of like my experiences of how it all ties together. And so I would charge any leader in the military, junior leader, to always kind of be thinking one step, two step. We get taught in doctrine, like, know the higher mission 2 levels up, like know 3, 4, like know the entire picture. Doesn't mean you have to be an expert at it, but being able to apply that, the dots, like being able to apply a framework where you're able to connect dots all the way up to a strategic level, will make you a better, will help you make more informed decisions, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it turns you into a force multiplier, because now you're, instead of just doing that little thing you're at whatever section, now you can be a valuable asset to your commander and understanding, and you could give, a better advice on how you can be employed, or at least understanding, a bigger picture. I think makes you more lethal as well.
I think another really cool thing that I always advocate for is people to pop in and out of SOF. So a lot of the CSTs wanted to go directly back into a special operations pipeline, like a civil affairs pipeline or a PSYOP pipeline, because that's what was, kind of more known or available. And again, you can spend your whole time in special operations, but there is value in popping back out to conventional forces because of what you're able to, what experiences you're able to share. And then it's also like, how do we continue to get good people continuing to volunteer for special operations? Well, we're always you're always able to kind of spot and assess, identify like strong junior enlisted and junior officers that you might be able to do the same thing that warrant officer did for me when he said, hey, I think you should try out for this CST thing. Here's a flyer.
Yeah.
Like, how do we go out and be that sensor?
And you see it on the Ranger Regiment too, man. As the guys climb the ladders, they start making platoon sergeant. I mean, there's not as tons of them in the regiment, so those guys go back out into the infantry and become phenomenal platoon sergeants, first sergeants, command sergeant majors, because they had that experience in the Ranger Regiment, and then they go back into the infantry and they just can make that that infantry platoon, that infantry company, just a lot more lethal, and bring that experience, to your point, of that soft experience, but apply it on a broader level. So that's a great point. What was after Space Force?
So again, like I said, I knew I wanted to get back into kind of special operations, and I had explored some various kind of unique programs towards the end of my command. I ended up putting my packet in for a special mission unit, and I went to assessment and selection on the tail end. I did a 2-year command. So the tail end of that time at the WISOC was when I went out and assessed for another special operations unit. I was successful. And so after my command ended, again, grateful for the leadership at the time that said, hey, you didn't do Captain's Career Course yet. Rather than going to Signal Captain's Career Course, because of kind of the pipeline that you're on, we want you to go to Maneuver Captain's Career Course. So I actually went from Germany. I PCS'd to Fort Benning, Georgia, and, had the awesome opportunity of doing Maneuver Captain's Career Course, which, again, you're one of very few women. At this time, let's see, it was 20. They had just opened combat arms to women. There were no young infantry or armor officers that were already captains at that level, because they had just opened it. So you really just had, for the first time, young second lieutenants coming out of West Point or ROTC or whatnot, going into their first platoon leader time. But the other women that were in Maneuver Captain's Career Course, there was, some pilots, MPs, engineers. But it's open to any, branch. So one of the ways that I hope I paid that forward down the line was a young captain that I was mentoring was geo-separated from her husband, and she was struggling with hey, how do we we're trying to find a way to get stationed together, but my career course is here. He's going to go to Maneuver Captain's Career Course. I was like, put in your packet to go to ask to go to Maneuver Captain's Career Course. It's an incredible, it's a leadership school. It's going to be a little bit more difficult because you do a lot of tactics that if you're an infantry, if you have the reps as an infantry platoon leader, come a little easier because you're briefing op orders for a company sized element. And so, there's a learning curve there, but anyone can be successful if you try, so she ended up, doing that. She switched her career course and ended up going to MCCC, which, again, very grateful for that opportunity. And I learned a lot from my peers. A lot of them had done deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan on the conventional side as young platoon leaders and had some, experiences far different than what I experienced as a CST. But with the same, they had the weight of responsibility of being the one in command on the ground and having to, maybe react to a kinetic situation. And they don't have they didn't have maybe the whole stack in the sky. And what I mean by that is all the different air support that a lot of times you deploy with when you're in a special operations unit. So back to the point of, hey, come out of SOF, share those experiences with the conventional side. There's things on the conventional side that, we can also take back into SOF of, hey, lessons learned and TTPs and just leadership kind of 101, because it's a different leadership challenge when you have hundreds of young 18-year-old fresh, infantry.
Yeah, my best friend and I were talking last night. He was a 275 guy, actually, before I picked you up from the airport. And one of the things he said to me was, one of the safest places you could be is in special operations, because, it's probably some of the best training, but also some of the best assets,
Right.
ISR assets, helicopters, best pilots, whatever. And so I think that gets lost sometimes too. A lot of these infantry companies and maneuver support elements, cav units, didn't have all the assets, especially like you look at Iraq, Ramadi, Fallujah, Mosul, some nasty firefights, and didn't have all the assets and still had to get out there get after it. So I think that's a great point that you make, and why it's good to come back out and not only what, leadership and a special operations unit can do back into the regular Army, and vice versa, man, and understanding capabilities and all that. So that's a really good point. After CST, you pursued a classified SMU, within USASOC. What sparked your interest, and kind of how did you navigate that ambiguous path to apply?
Similarly to CST, kind of the interest was sparked by this desire to continue to challenge myself and seek out, those organizations that were going to put me to the test. Personally, professionally, I wanted to be part of organizations where, you're surrounded by, everyone that's really wants to be there, right? Because it's going to be an arduous path to get there. So if you're raising your hand for it and you're making it through on the other side, then you're surrounded by good folks. And so I, without knowing a whole lot about what would be on the other side, took a leap of faith. And like I said, I did the assessment and selection for the organization prior to leaving command. Was successful after maneuver captain's career course, started the training pipeline for it. And it was a really, like I said, I definitely learned stuff about myself. And so that was something that didn't fail.
Yeah. That selection was longer and tougher than CST, obviously without specifics. Can you share kind of how it tested your mental and kind of physical grit?
Yeah. The one, kind of story I'll fall back on, and I brought this up a little bit in the beginning of, my mom, she'd kind of always tell me like, hey, what's the worst can happen? You're going to come out the other side no matter what, having learned something about yourself. There's just like this kind of anti-worry mantra that I grew up with. And, in this particular assessment selection, there's not a lot of feedback. It's ambiguous by design. And so if you dwell on what did I do wrong, what did I not, how am I doing, and you stay in that space, it's going to distract you from the task at hand, and being able to be kind of cognitively like sharp in the moment when you need to be. And so I just tried to always kind of remind myself like, hey, go out. I'm going to do the best I can at this task. It's going to end at some point. Can't go on forever. Like I might be tired. I might be, one foot in front of the other. How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? Like whatever it is, I'm going to tackle it the best I can. But, if I don't do something right, the mindset of like, hey, take the lesson from it, put it in the past, and then, don't dwell on it and move forward, I think is something that helped me get through. And the one thing that I kind of learned later was humans have different ways of managing stress. And so during this training course, we had heart rate variability monitors. So you could kind of have a review after like a high stakes, exercise or meeting or something like that. You could see where how your stress levels kind of rise, and then what do you do or what can you do to bring that back to kind of a baseline thing. And one of the things that I found helped me manage my heart rate variability or my stress was gratitude and practicing gratitude. A lot of people do like breath work. For me, I would just envision, a positive, mental image, and that would kind of like put my body back at ease. And so when I was going through this assessment selection, in the evenings, one of the nights I just remember I was kind of alone, and I was singing America the Beautiful, like just to myself. And it was one of the songs that my grandma used to always have us sing when we were younger, and we'd always sing like with my cousins and stuff. And it was that practice, like, I didn't know singing, but it was really me practicing gratitude and like thinking back to those really like core memories, positive memories that probably without me knowing it put me at ease and kind of was able to probably reset a lot of that, anxiety or, high stress that we sometimes feel in these any environment when you're being evaluated and tested. And so naturally I was
that's pretty interesting. I'm super interested in that. I track my heart rate variability pretty regularly. Was there other techniques or any techniques that they gave you, or was this just like, hey, you have this problem. You're going to be screwed if you don't fix it. Did they give you like ideas or?
Not in A&S, but in the follow-on training course, the awesome thing about special operations units is they integrate a lot of human performance and mental performance, awesome. Coaches. And I think we're doing that more on the conventional side as well. But it's really all about like the holistic care for the warrior. And part of that is, we're like, go. We want to run. And sometimes you have to like take some time to reset and focus on maintaining, optimal readiness or health. And so the techniques that they gave us, when we were kind of going through the course, a lot of them were the breathing, techniques.
What kind of breathing techniques? Like box breathing?
Box breathing was one. That's the one that sticks out to me. But for me, again, every person kind of responds differently to that or to, again, for me, it was like just visualizing a grateful moment.
Super interesting. Yeah, that's awesome. How did it feel to compete in such a high stakes environment?
The best thing about it for me is like you're again always kind of you're in this competition with others, but not really in this competition with others because you're all kind of wanting to see each other succeed, but you're also becoming better because of the guys on your left and right. And in this case, I was all guys. So CST was different, but so I just look at it as, I don't think about it too much, but you just look at it as an opportunity to improve yourself.
How did you adapt to quick decision making under pressure?
That's something that I definitely had to improve over time. And actually, I'm going to go all the way back to a story from ROTC that stuck with me. And it was a sticks lane. So this is essentially a sticks lane is anytime that you're in ROTC, you're in like the platoon leader position. So you're in the command leadership position and you're having to now do some battle drill 1 alpha or some react to contact. And you're getting evaluated on it. And this one particular sticks lane, we had to determine how we were going to overcome this adversary's position. And I knew in my gut that I should take the high ground and come around to flank this position. But at the time, they throw different distractors kind of at you while you're trying to come up with the solution, whether that's a sim round going off or, something to kind of distract you. And I remember I doubted myself and I changed the plan midway through execution and had us come off the high ground and then kind of go in this ravine. We all died. So that, I always think about that. And it's so funny because that's like, again, sometimes the failures stick with you the most. And so I felt like I was, when I got to this, next level of how do you, consume information and then make a decision. Sometimes it's based off, kind of a gut feeling. Sometimes you might have more time to make the decision, but what you do in preparation matters. So the more that you can prepare and go through contingencies and visualize contingencies in your head or in practice, like the quicker that you're going to be able to respond in the actual moment. And so I think nothing can replace hours spent on preparing for all the different things that can happen in a particular operation. But when it comes time to actual execution, you gotta go. And if it's the wrong answer, then you move through it and you adapt. But the worst thing is to not make a decision or to be paralyzed by it or to change, when you are in that dynamic environment. So I think back to your question, long story short, it's prepare as much as you can. And part of that is, just the visualizing of all the different contingencies that can happen.
It's hilarious because we're talking about this in the confines of a special missions unit, but I literally had a conversation with my 12-year-old daughter yesterday about, the whole piss poor planning prevents poor performance. Something happened in our day yesterday. My daughter didn't plan for it very well. And so like, that's a life lesson that carries, whether you're in combat, whether you're in a high stakes foreign country preparing, whatever, or you're a 12-year-old that wants to go to a soccer game that you didn't tell your parents about. You know what I mean? I think like that whole, preparation and planning, it's just such a huge part of life. And I think sometimes mistakes happen. A lot of the times, the enemy always gets to say, but,
Right.
Failure to prepare, failure to plan, and I think that's a key leader. It's super important for leaders, right? It goes back to leadership.
Yeah, 100%. And I love that you tied it again to like just normal civilian life or normal life. We say civilian life, but because I use this practice even in just ethical decision making. Like what would, how would you react if something were to go against your morals or your values? Like, can you think through like how you're going to respond to that and then be prepared so that you don't have moral dissonance by making like a choice that you regret later or something like that. So not even in, daily activities, but just like how you want to live your life and going through kind of that stuff.
Yeah. And I think too, man, it goes back to the mindset too, right? Like we think of preparation and planning and, sometimes the first thought that might come to your head is sitting at a desk and studying things for hours. But sometimes it could be as simple as just thinking about a situation in your mind. I know in law enforcement, I spent a long time there and, we always heard in training, and I've heard a lot in training, both in the military and in law enforcement, like, the body won't go where the mind hasn't already been. Like you can't train for every single contingency, but you can think about them a lot. Hey, what would I do in this situation? I was just reading an article. I think yesterday there was a Marine command sergeant major who was on an airplane. I think they were flying from Tokyo back to Hawaii, and the dude was sitting in the Marine was sitting in the exit row. Saw some dude pacing around, and that guy got up to open the escape door or the emergency exit door, and he recognized this dude's body behavior and tackled the dude. They ended up zip stripping him, and they were able to safely land. But that Marine, Sergeant Major, I'm sure at some point in his mind, he had either thought about a situation like that or whatever. And if you think about those things, that preparation, that planning, ethical decision-making, large battle strategy, or even, more simple tasks, I think it can help you be better prepared in life. So what a great point you brought up, Jessica. Thank you for that. As an OPSO or an operations officer, you integrated capabilities and high stakes missions, while you're in that unit. What was the atmosphere like working over there? Was it collaborative? Was it intense? Both?
Yeah, a bit of both. And I think the experience that I had at Maneuver Captain's Career Course, understanding, synchronizing, fire and effects, that translated because now I'm at this unit that has a lot of disciplines and capabilities under one, command. And so how do you integrate all that? How do you create that ops intel fusion, if you will, to provide the most options possible to, senior leaders? And so, as a signal officer, I found myself, again, having these really incredible opportunities to do things probably that like normally like a maneuver MOS or someone that's branched maneuver is going to have those opportunities versus a signal officer. And so that's one of the things that I love about the special operations community and the types of, pipelines you can find yourself in. And again, I attribute that time at MCCC again as a preparation for being able to be successful in integrating, a variety of capabilities.
Yeah, super cool. How did camaraderie kind of manifest itself over there? Similar in the way that you had it at CST.
I think the nature of the mission, obviously, people are very focused on, achieving, whatever, their particular team sets out to do. So you're really grounded in your purpose and your why, which anywhere you find that, I think you're naturally kind of cut from the same cloth, right? With the people on your left and right. And you spend a lot of time together. So again, maybe you're not deployed, but because these are really hard, complex problems that you're trying to solve, there's just a lot of time on target with each other. And by target in this sense, I don't necessarily mean like outside the wire in Afghanistan. I mean, could be in an office, with some whiteboards. So you really create great friendships. And, similar to the academy comment I made earlier about, when you go through hard things with a team or with people, you build these bonds and you have lifelong friendships that come out of that. So, I've since left the organization, but I have incredible, friends and a network of folks that, I'd give them the shirt off my back and vice versa, because of just the things you go through.
Yeah, I think there is like some kind of psychological thing with shared suffering. That's like, as you've talked about it, it's like this shared suffering, where you go through these hard tasks together and suffer together, and you form, like, it's huge in the jiu-jitsu community, because, when you do jiu-jitsu, it doesn't matter who you are, how big you are. I mean, granted, there's certain things that help, but, when you see somebody who has a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, whether it's a male or female, nobody gave that to them. You don't get to learn a dance move and then, the professor gives you the belt. You have time on the mat, you've got to suffer like everybody else. And so, I think that camaraderie is also seen, outside of the military, in like the jiu-jitsu community, because it's this shared suffering. And I think when you suffer together, it does form a bond. And that's, unique to your point. Yeah. Awesome. Thanks. How has your experience in multiple aspects in special operations kind of carried you forward into this next phase of your life?
My experiences have resulted in, I'd say, 2 big projects. One, Altru, which is a nonprofit, a living legacy for Ashley White, Jenny Moreno, Shannon Kent, and others who have paid the ultimate sacrifice. Our whole mission and purpose is to empower the next generation of leaders of character and action. We do that through storytelling, sharing, again, the values of these great warriors with the next generation. I think there's 2 things you got to tap into when we talk about, youth. And one, it's like the headspace, like the thing between your 2 ears, like ensuring that they're equipped with a growth mindset and the ability to think like, yeah, I can do that because I'm seeing it. I'm seeing these great examples. And then the thing that I kind of pulled off, the madrasa story in Afghanistan is like this whole investment in education. And right now the quickest and easiest access to learning and earning opportunities is the internet. And so part of Altru's, mission is also to equip the next generation with internet and digital tools, whether that's youth here in the U.S. or overseas. And it's become a space and a platform for women of special operations and the men we served alongside. So yeah, we're building this awesome, table, but it's not exclusive of men. In fact, we need great male leaders like George Frazier's of the world, like the brothers and the fathers of daughters in Afghanistan right now who are not only allowing their young girls to go to school under the Taliban, but are, providing infrastructure for these girls to go to school. So it's definitely a table for all. And again, it's all fueled by the sacrifice of our fallen teammates. So that's definitely a product of, experiences across the special operations community. And then the second big project, which kind of launched around the same time as the nonprofit, is Guerrera. And now that's 5 years in the making, finally out earlier this year, a 3-part docuseries.
Yeah, we're getting ready to dive on that in here in a second. I'm looking forward to talking about that as well. What's the biggest misconception about, secretive special missions units?
I think the biggest thing that I see is like people self-selecting because they don't think they're going to be good enough to provide value to that unit. And that's something we've got to overcome as an enterprise because, there's a space for everyone, every MOS, every kind of specialty, for anyone that's willing to, roll up their sleeves, work hard and get after hard problems. Like there's a space for you. So don't self-select, like put your name in the hat. And again, if you do, if you don't make it through the selection process, you're still going to come out learning something about yourself. You're probably going to make some good friends in selection, and you'll walk away knowing that at least you tried, and that maybe there's just a different path that's meant for you. And I've had plenty of those experiences, whether it's the Air Force Academy, going from there to ROTC, or where you wind up like, hey, this isn't where I thought I was going to end up or where I'm going to be, but rather than linger in that hallway, if you will, like breach the next door and
Great.
Open up a new opportunity for yourself.
Awesome response. Thank you for that. How would you inspire someone considering this path?
I talk to young officers, young enlisted men and women quite often. And what I try and do is lay out options, because there's a lot of options within the special operations enterprise. And some people are drawn like, hey, I really want to live overseas. I want to work out of an embassy. Okay, well, maybe this path or this path is better for you, for women a lot of women that I mentor that come out of, combat arms, are looking to, be that next level, I don't want to use the word door kicker, but like that's kind of like they're looking for that type of action. So okay, there's kind of some different paths that might be better for you here. So ultimately, like trying to understand kind of the lay of the land, if you will. I was one of those that didn't necessarily know a lot of folks, behind the curtain, and so it was a little bit of a blind leap of faith for me when I was going down this path. But I do think that we can do better at providing a baseline kind of awareness of all the different options. And that doesn't mean giving away the keys to the castle. It doesn't mean giving away the tricks on like, hey, this is what you need to be successful, because that, that varies, for different organizations. But trying to help inform that next generation that's trying to come into one of these unique pipelines, like just giving a little additional information of what might be suitable for their personality and what they kind of want to achieve.
Awesome. Last thing I just want to ask you about your time over there is, did you ever get an opportunity to work with Shannon Kent, or did you know her?
Her memory lives on. I did not know her personally, but she has an incredible impact on a lot of folks from the organization, and we integrate her story into a lot of what we do at Altru. And so just recently, we had a young Afghan American that wanted to use her language skills. So sent her Shannon Kent's story, and she asked to talk to a recruiter like the next week. So again, her legacy lives on and continues to inspire, folks every day.
I knew some people from my old unit that were in the same area, working on the same platform with her, and just speak of her as like a Marvel, comic character. So again, another, female badass that paid the ultimate price for this country. And it's just a point to drive home that, freedom isn't always free. So sometimes, it's real easy for Americans to, focus on the next trip to the lake and the next barbecue. And dude, look, we're thankful to have those things. But, we just had Memorial Day, and, for those of us that have served, it's definitely kind of in the forefront. So I just wanted to, to mention her name here as well.
Thank you.
I wanted to kind of just transition before we dive into Guerrera and Altru, which is super important. Just one of the things we talk about on this podcast that is super important to me is mental health. And, you're a person that has, touched a lot of different spectrums, especially in special operations, combat deployments, working in an extremely high stakes environment. I wanted to just kind of ask you, CST and soft missions, for you meant constant adrenaline and, irregular sleep. How did you manage the mental and kind of physical strain that comes with doing those jobs?
At the time, I think I relied heavily on community and a continued sense of purpose. I wasn't doing a lot of, or using a lot of the resources that I know about now, having gotten out. I'm still in the reserves, but I think that the enterprise has done a good job of trying to educate what other things are out there. So brain health, for example, we're discovering that a lot of the PTSD is we're not treating the right symptoms, because we've had repeated blast exposures, our brain has swelled, and that's what's causing some of those symptoms. Cancer screening, early cancer screening. We've done a huge education effort for folks to get screened earlier. And then one thing that I've dived a lot more into recently is just gut health and hormones. Huge. And no one really talked about that stuff in 2013 when I was a CST. No, you didn't really know how that might impact your performance or your just well-being, your mood. But all that, matters. So I think we've done a better job at kind of painting that holistic picture. And hey, there's different modalities that are going to resonate with different people. But as long as kind of what's out there and you're looking at, the different pillars of health and, the physical, the spiritual, the cognitive, and you're kind of the cognitive, mental, you're kind of at least addressing all of those. I think we've done a lot better job at that. And I've slowly discovered, again, more things in those other areas. Whereas I think what got me through in the moment was really just, a sense of community and sense of purpose that has been unwavering since raising my right hand. So.
Yeah, I think it's a great time. It's a great time, in my opinion, to be alive, because holistic health and medical science is, we're making massive leaps and bounds. To your point in gut health, I think they're discovering now that, the gut is your second brain, and how it has an effect on your entire body, whether it's hormone regulation, sickness. Just getting rid of parasites. We're one of the few countries that, you have to go see a doctor to get a parasitic detox, but they're linking, parasites in the gut to cancer. And, you talked about, cancer screening, the Hunter 7 Foundation.
Yes.
There's a blood test they can do that they can do. And I can't remember the name of the company. I'll try to find it for when this airs, but it screens for 78 different cancers. Super, super powerful. I don't know, especially, as you start getting a little bit older, there's not too many of us where cancer hasn't touched, somebody we know personally, or if not somebody personally, it's, somebody that their family member, etc. So super great points. Any rituals or habits that kind of keep you grounded?
Practicing gratitude. So pretty easy. Before I go to bed, just thinking of hey, what was I something I'm thankful or grateful for. I try to do it every evening. Sometimes I don't, but again, I know now that resets my stress, my heart rate variability. So if I'm able to spend a little time each day doing that, I know that works for me.
Is that a mental thing, or is that something you write down, or?
I just do it mentally. Yeah.
Cool.
I know a lot of other friends like journaling has become kind of like really therapeutic for them. But for me, just mentally kind of thinking through that a positive spin on things, even if it's a rough day or whatnot, I think has been helpful for me. And then the one that I'm at least trying to do now in the future more is like the sleep, because I know how much sleep is, critical to so much of our health. And that's my the thing that I want to focus on more so kind of going forward, is trying to get a little more normalcy in my sleep pattern.
Yeah, I mean, that's another huge thing. They're finding, that lack of sleep can cause like heart issues and stress, and can really just wreak havoc on your body.
Mm-hmm.
And then you end up with that whole chasing the dragon, where, you get up in the morning, you pound caffeine all day, and then you got to take sleep meds to sleep, or yeah. So sleep's another big one. I really like the gratitude thing too. I mean, even if it's in thought, I think the old saying is, be mindful of your thoughts, because your thoughts turn to words, your words turn to action. And I didn't understand that till I, got a little bit older as well. But after I've really worked on changing my thought process and really being mindful of what I say.
Mm-hmm.
I heard somebody mention the other day, they call it spelling, right? Writing words, because words cast spells, and it just really becomes the powerful, it really is powerful, kind of how we think and how we speak, because it can really change, our life. So it sounds kind of woo a little bit, but I've seen it in real life, change things, change situations.
Yeah.
So another, great thought. Losing teammates like Jenny Moreno, Ashley White was profound. How did you process that grief in the moment, but also like over time?
In the moment, again, relied on community a lot. There was another CST that at the time that Jenny was killed, there was another CST on the same base, and yeah, immediately, just that was my support, like near term, close term support system. I also wrote a lot at the time. I think I go back and I can, I wrote my sister pretty regularly when I was deployed. I journaled. And so I think getting thoughts on paper, and again, having a support network were the ways that I dealt with it in the moment. And then over time, it goes back to how do you channel that loss into something positive. And, I'm close with, Jenny's family, for example, and I know that that's challenging for them no matter what, because it's like, hey, how's there any silver lining out of this, right? Even Ashley White's parents came with us to the USASOC memorial. They too, and this was after the withdrawal, and so they're like, yeah, when we think about, hey, what was this for? That's a challenging question to get from a Gold Star, family. What was magical in that moment was the Afghan Katejas Special Forces was with me in that conversation. One of the male counterparts, his wife was also with him. His wife has one of the schools in Afghanistan that we're providing support to. And then there was a young ranger, female ranger, who looked up to Ashley and Jenny as a reason she went through ranger school. And those three, I didn't have to say a word. Those three answered that question for Mr. and Mrs. White. And I think that made a difference I hope it did,
Of course it did.
So yeah, gotta hunt for it, but
yeah, and it's hard.
There.
Like we have this GWAT, right? I mean, those of us that serve, man, we spent. I mean, I remember 9/11 like it was yesterday. We all do. Like if you're an American, you remember it. And for those of us that serve, it impacted. And yeah, man, there's a bunch of disgruntled vets out there. I'd be a liar to say sometimes I'm not disgruntled. It was gut wrenching, as we're going to talk about, in a little bit, to watch the Afghan withdrawal. But again, sometimes you got to hunt for it. And I think life is what you make of it. And you can definitely take lemons and be sour, or you can add some sugar and make some lemonade. You get a choice. You get a say. You can be a disgruntled, grumpy vet if you want, and there's plenty of them out there. And I'm not saying they don't have the right to be that way, but you can also try to find a positive spin. And yes, it might change the way view. Somebody asked me recently too, like, hey, would you let your kids serve in the military, knowing what you know? Absolutely. The military was the best thing that happened to me. Is our government perfect? Absolutely not. Like, we're not perfect. And I think you can turn on any news channel, but we're still, for those of us that have traveled to many countries, yourself included, I've been to a few myself, we're still the best thing out there, and, the military is a big reason why, we have a great country. And I don't care who you are. It's real easy to Monday morning quarterback that from, your basement on a computer. But for those of us that have, seen the world, America still is one of the best things going, man. Yeah. Not to get on a tangent. Sorry. I listen to your Team House podcast interview, which is a good podcast. Jack puts on a good podcast. You mentioned something in that podcast, being a woman veteran that's, faced stigmas and felt, kind of unseen stigmas, especially in soft. What do you have to talk about, women and now that women are getting into, the infantry, special operations, going to Ranger School? I know that's something you're passionate about. It's something I didn't want to skip over in the podcast.
Yeah, thank you for asking. It's definitely been a point of media and a lot of, contention, a lot of opinions resurfacing on a topic that I think if we just look at what's the American thing to do, it's allow equal access to opportunity. I don't think, that's not changing. And I'm talking specifically about combat arms being open to women, because ultimately it's about a standard. And if you meet that standard and demonstrate character, competence, commitment, then, that should be all that matters.
And I also think, not to interrupt you, but I think it's an interesting conversation to have because, there's been women in law enforcement forever. So like, we're okay as a society with letting women get shot on domestic violence calls or, making traffic stops. There's plenty of female officers that have been hurt, injured, and killed. And that's never, nobody thinks about that. Point. But God forbid we let a woman go to Ranger School and, beat a bunch of, dudes who couldn't make it. And it's this thing where women shouldn't do it. Now, I'd love to get your thoughts on, do you think there should be like a universal PT standard, or that women should have a separate standard? Because, that was the thing for a long time in the military. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think I do think, hey, there are biological differences in men and women. And I agree with a different gender standard for the military as a whole, but then combat arms having one singular standard. And, when I was at Fort Leavenworth, which is where they do, Command General Staff College for, the officers, you go and, you have this moment in time where you're able to kind of reflect and do professional military education and kind of hone in on some of, the things I mentioned earlier, like strategic thinking, and you have these different classes. And one of my electives was a women in war class. And, we studied history. I mean, George Washington had, women employed in unique capacities all the way to present day. And with every conflict, women have advanced kind of the roles that they serve in. They've demonstrated their capability to perform, and then it opens additional opportunities in the next conflict, right? And that progress has continued to to be, transparent all the way up to the GWAT when finally, 2015 combat arms now open for women. And a lot of the young folks I talked to today, like they bring that kind of stuff up. And my message to them is, hey, there's a lot of noise about this right now, but that's what it is. It's just noise. Once you actually are kind of in the organization and in these units, if you're focused on being a good teammate and performing, like you're gonna be successful. And the other thing that I always kind of hit on as well is we as an institution need to get better at understanding women can do both, right? Like women can meet a standard and go in combat arms, or women can be leveraged for their gender, and we should be able to have that, meet that duality. And what I mean by that is like the CST program, for example, or the female engagement teams that operated in Iraq. That was leveraging gender as a capability. I wasn't a combat arms female. If I were at that time, I would have been in charge of the sniper. There would have been a different role that I was playing on target than engaging with women and children. So how do we both encourage and support women that meet the standard for combat arms while also realizing, recognizing, and employing women purposefully because of their gender? And I think we can get better at doing both of those.
Yeah, and I think you, not we, but you have kind of been at ground zero. You've seen that both in your circle of women that you've served with and in the units you've served with, right? Like, the combat support teams were leveraging just with you that, using women to get, better information, which allowed us to become more lethal as a fighting force. I think it's ignorant to kind of ignore that. That was something, maybe if we would have deployed it earlier in the war, might have been more successful. Who knows? I don't know, but it's definitely something worth talking about. Something, I served in the tertiary of special operations. I was not in special operations. I was a, intel guy. But again, man, intel's full of women, and they're extremely successful. I don't got to explain to you, you spend a lot of time working in that world. Women have access to can access denied areas and access targets and, spot and assess better at certain things, et cetera, et cetera,
right.
et cetera, et cetera. So I definitely think it's a conversation worth having, dude. So and it's cool to see, Altru and, the woman power, movement. I know that's not who you guys are, but I there are a lot of good women that have served. I served with, my boss downrange, our SIO, she was a female. I'm still friends with her today. She's a case officer. And she was badass, dude. And, I would work for her any day of the week again,
right, right.
Yeah. And it didn't matter that she was a woman or, whatever. She was a great boss and she was great at what she did. Kara, I love you. So, it's like, awesome. It was a great experience. And I just think like the internet, for all the things that it does good, right? It's brought us a lot of things. There's still,
always gonna be haters out there.
Yeah,
that's
haters
why
gonna hate, man. Like it's yeah, but it's cool. It's cool to, kind of watch. I've watched Altru and kind of watch what you guys are doing, what you're up, kind of who you guys are about. Obviously we talked earlier today. We plan on partnering with you guys in the future, and it's a great mission. So, keep doing what you're doing, and kudos to you and all the CSTs out there that came before you and have come after because of you. That's a powerful, again, I'm a girl dad. Jeremiah Wilbur kind of coined that phrase. You got me, saying that, but it's I want my girls to be powerful and not, my daughters especially not be, denied opportunities just because they're opposite sex. Right. But at the same time, I also want them, to meet the standard, right? Like
100%.
I want the best person for the job, I guess.
100%. Yeah. And I think that's it. You hit it perfectly. Best person for the job. Like that's what it's about. Yeah. And that's why George Frazier put me in the, the kit room. Like, hey, I want to also ensure that you have all the information and are equipped to perform at your best. You're going to have every opportunity to do so.
Yeah.
Now, prove me right or prove me wrong, right? You know?
And it's recognizing that you went through a pipeline. You'd already been selected. You'd been through, you went to assessment and selection. You went through a pipeline. You did the training. You're there. You know what I mean? Like, there's no point to continue to haze until you prove that you're incapable, and then that's a different conversation. So I don't want to beat that dead horse. Let's just take a break for a quick second, and we'll come back and talk about the documentary. I'm super excited for that.
Great.
Cool, man. Coming back from the break, I'm excited to talk about this documentary, man. It's the whole reason. Well, not the whole reason, but this is kind of how I found you. I'm super passionate about your documentary. It's kind of funny just because it was so well made. And I've gotten to know George, obviously, through you from that documentary, who's just a great human being. So I just want to kind of give you a chance to open up, kind of about Guerrera, like, if you'll just kind of give us the genesis of how it started.
My cousin was dating a filmmaker, Will, who runs Dulcinea Productions. And I called him up. I said, hey, I've got, this idea. I want to kind of do a little memorial tribute film in honor of Jenny. And original plan was that was going to be about 15 minutes. And flew Will to San Diego. Jenny is buried at Rosecrans National Cemetery in San Diego. And he had some interviews with a couple of the core initial characters. Called me and was like, hey, I want to take this on as my next full length project. This story is bigger than a 15-minute short. So let's do this. And so the rest is history.
Let's go.
And but yeah, that's how it started. Again, I knew that I wanted to leverage or shine a light on Jenny's story and the CST kind of program as an example of great warriors to inspire the next generation. And again, that was the genesis of it.
So I mean, you're still in the military doing your military thing, and then at some point you guys started filming in Afghanistan, right?
Right. So we started filming in Afghanistan shortly before we withdrew. The reason why we were filming in Afghanistan was part of the legacy of, I think, the cultural support team program, the female tactical platoon, our Afghan counterparts. At the time, the FTPs were still going out on mission every day, and the thought was, hey, they're going to continue to do that and continue to build better opportunities for future leaders in Afghanistan, particularly young women. And from my experience in CST, knowing that we needed to invest more in education and in the next generation, I started kind of looking for, hey, who's in Afghanistan right now educating young women in rural villages. And I came across Pashtana Durrani, who's the founder of Learn Afghanistan, and hit her up on Instagram, actually. I was like, hey, I would really like for you to be part of this project. We'd love to come out and film what you're doing at schools in Kandahar and elsewhere throughout the country. And from there, Will worked with an in-country team to start filming. And we were actually in Kandahar when we were filming in Kandahar when Kandahar fell to the Taliban.
What was that like, dude?
Chaos, a lot of WhatsApp messages, popping up on your phone. I think a lot of the veteran folks in the veteran space experience that. Pashtana, wrote me and said, hey, I think there might be some trouble, but I think we should still film. I was like, are you sure? And then it was just a few hours later, she was like, Kandahar is falling. I'm gonna move to a safe place. And from there, it was kind of like that reaction of my focus was on trying to help her get out, whereas the rest of the CSD community kind of focused on safely getting the female tactical platoon out.
So you guys were getting messages as a COST cohort of all you, like you guys are getting messages from all over.
Right.
What was the tone of the messages, or you know what I mean? Like what were you guys feeling? You know what I mean?
The tone definitely frantic, kind of grasping at everyone wanted any possible route or opportunity to try and get to, again, a safe place. And because of how rapidly things degraded in country, and because of the female tactical balloon, as I mentioned earlier, they were a minority, they were women, they worked with, saw special operations counterparts. They were truly at risk. One of them, Major Hakimi, was actually killed in an honor killing right before the rest of her teammates were safely evacuated. So she's kind of part of our memorials when we come together as a community. We always, remember Maja being alongside Ashley and Jenny as well. But in all of that chaos, there was also these great acts of humanity, right? Of people just working through their networks, working through whatever context they had to come together and try and help people. And so at the airport, Manaz Akbari, she was the female tactical platoon commander. She helped sort, out and find FTPs kind of in crowds. We've seen a lot of that footage, and it's, kind of heart-wrenching to watch while she was like there on ground working with American counterparts to bring those FTPs to safety inside the gate and get them out. And then Pashtana, on the other hand, fled to Pakistan. And then we were able to work a J1 visa, actually, which is like a student visa to Wellesley. And she was able to come to the U.S. under that visa rather than asylum.
Yeah, that's wild. I mean, it's mentally, it's just kind of hard to unpack. So I'm thinking about all the things that took place. Were you there in country during that?
I was not, no. And again, being on the other side of it, you're just constantly getting messages from so many different, people, and just trying to work through like what can we do collectively to get people to safety.
Yeah. What did it feel like, after serving and working in Afghanistan and all that, to watch all that unfold?
It's a horrible feeling.
Yeah, I don't think I've talked about this yet on a podcast. It's I remember very clearly where I was. I mean, it's not a 9/11 thing, but watching those Marines, get hit by that the suicide bomber. It was wild. And then just watching, I mean, I had spent a bunch of time in Kabul, and that Kaya airport was probably like the worst airport we could have ever evacuated from. I mean, it's like trying to evac in downtown Los Angeles when we had Bagram, which was this open, wide open, well protected, well situated airport. So it's kind of almost mind blowing and mind numbing at the same time. And you're just like, man, everything that we work so hard, kind of as a nation, right? I mean, take politics out of side of it. I mean, you and I both know people that bled there, died there, paid that ultimate sacrifice, and you can't help but wonder, what the man, you know what I mean? Like, what just happened? So I can't imagine, the frustration, and then seeing all the, getting messages, frantic, because you and I both know what happens when they get caught, and they knew, So anyway, pretty wild. I don't want to spend too much time on that. It's a little depressing, but I know there's this sentiment, especially those of us that served in Afghanistan, like, I think it goes back to the conversation we had earlier on the podcast. We can choose to let those thoughts consume us, or, we can remember our teammates and the people that we served with, and remember all the good memories. Because, say what you want about Afghanistan. I still, I'd go back tomorrow. Like I have a lot of good memories, a lot of good people I met, both on our side and their side, right? Goes back to the whole human thing. I met some great Afghans while I was over there. Great.
Absolutely. I think the same practice of, channeling the loss of a teammate, that's compounded when you look at kind of the loss of a country and all unraveled so quickly. But starting to think through, like, what can we do? Like, not all hope is lost. And one of the things that I've always been that's attracted me to Pashtana and the way that she thinks and develops, leaders is because she's the anti-victim, right? And even today, she's like, yeah, there's hope in Afghanistan. Don't lose hope. As soon as you lose hope, that's the end of the game, right? So we watched, that unravel. How it relates to Guerrera is, that wasn't the ending that we capture the withdrawal in episode 3, the third episode, and that wasn't, of course, a ending we wanted to tell. We didn't envision that kind of being the closure of the story, but we had to adapt because you can't tell a story about, the mission in Afghanistan and 2 decades of war and avoid that. And so I think Will and I said we got to face this kind of head on, and it's going to be tough to address. It's going to be tough to watch, but what we hoped was that the same way that we can find, purpose in the loss of teammates, we can find purpose in what impact was made there, what we were able to, protect over those 20 years of war there, which a lot of us, we may not know, right? What did our presence result in? The unknowns, you can't really measure that. What attacks didn't happen?
Yeah, I was about to say we had 0 9/11 style attacks for the entire time.
So you can't say it was a waste. And then the thing that I always kind of come back to is, for 20 years, the Afghan population lived in an environment where, I don't want to just say American values, but basic human rights were they were part of civil society, right? And so those seeds were planted, and they're not going away. And when you talk to the folks that are still there, there's very much an underground resistance happening in Afghanistan today. And that is irregular warfare. That's a special operations bread and butter, right? So how does that play out? And we'll yet to see that, but losing hope is the first way that it doesn't play out in a positive way.
Great point. I mean, you interviewed like diverse voices. You had CST members, Rangers, Delta Force operators, Afghan activists. What was the toughest part of like kind of weaving all those stories together?
I credit Will with a lot of the, that creative ability to do that. But I think there's a common thread across every character in the film, and part of it is this willingness to serve in some capacity, like to serve others in some capacity, to be part of something bigger than yourself. And one of the things that we're demonstrating across all those different characters from different backgrounds, different genders, different race, is that there's more that unites us than divides us.
Great statement.
And that's like the core, that's one of the core takeaways of the film. And we just do that through storytelling and through kind of the framing the cultural support team program. And again, the sacrifice of Jenny and the Ranger she died alongside on Objective Aries.
Was there any interview that kind of changed your perspective on anything?
I'll go back to George. And
if you're watching this, if you're listening to this on Spotify, you're not getting to see the huge picture that we have in the background that's on the YouTube, but there's a glowing picture of Jessica and George Fraser in our background. We like George.
One of the things that I and envious almost of Will is that he has spent hours like you and I, right? Like talking to some of my heroes, some of my best friends, and has learned things about them because you naturally you're comfortable and it's therapeutic to talk about some of these experiences. And there were things that I learned about every character that was interviewed that I didn't know before, that I learned from watching the interviews. And George particularly, and it's hard to pick out one because there are so many that kind of had this same vein where you're just like, man, the way that you've carried yourself with such humility, because there's so much that you've overcome, not even just in your military professional career, but well before that, and how much that inspires, me as your friend. Like I know that story has, we've got to share that story because that's going to resonate with someone else in this world. And when, Will was kind of dissecting, like, hey, to your point earlier, like, how do you weave this all together, and what do you keep, what do you not? Because we have tons of terabytes of footage, and not everything made it into the 3-part series. And there's a lot on the cutting room floor, and I hope this is just the beginning of more stories like this and more content. But the one of the things that we kind of decided we should not. We talked about reducing the number of characters in the series. And I think both of us were like, hey, the amount of diverse voices, we want to ensure that we showcase as many of these stories as possible, because again, you don't know who in the audience is going to be like, man, that resonates with me. And so that's one of the reasons why we tried to pull so many different characters in.
Yeah, awesome. Yeah, I mean, George is probably one of the most humble savages I've ever met in my life. 13 combat, or 13 Bronze Stars, 4 Purple Hearts, and yeah, good human. We're hoping to have. I think George is coming in August. That story is
very
again to your
that.
point. Like he overcame a lot to get to even get his door into what he did later on in life, and that's I'm looking forward to that interview. And thank you for linking us up. I wouldn't have met George if it wasn't for you. Guerrera aims to shift perceptions and inspire service. What feedback from veterans or civilians have kind of like moved you since this documentary has been released?
Some of the ones that have stuck with me most are like young people, right? That have watched it and said, I want to be a nurse because of Jenny, or I look forward to raising my right hand. Like, I want to be part of that type of community, because I think that's, at the core game, we're trying to showcase and demonstrate these values, and that's what resonates most with me. But there's been some really awesome feedback all around of, the series captures a bunch of different, kind of complex. There's the withdrawal, there's women in combat, there's coming home, and how do you overcome, the demons you may have experienced downrange. So there's a lot there, and it tells a complete and honest and very candid story. And I think that's been a lot of the feedback has been that they appreciate the holisticness of the story.
What were some of the production challenges and those impacts?
A lot of the, I'd say, Objective Aries, episode 2, trying to help people kind of teleport, if you will, into that situation. That was the one scene in the series that was reenacted, or that we filmed. We actually filmed it on Fort Bragg, and doing that, trying to showcase like the emotion there and the chaos, and trying to like translate that on screen, I think was again, I credit a lot to Will and the way his kind of design eye, if you will, but doing it in a way that's also sensitive to the fact that those are America's sons and daughters that died on that mission, and when their families or friends watch it, will it do it justice? I don't know if that I'll ever have an answer to that, but I hope that we did it in a way that, again, honors their sacrifice.
You did. I watched it. Like, I've seen it 3 times.
Thank you.
I've sent it to everybody. Yeah, and if you're listening to this on the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, we'll have a link in the description. For that, it's on. You can find Guerrera on. It's on Apple TV. It's on Amazon Prime. You can Google Guerrera, Guerrera, and it'll come up. I'm not just saying that because I'm friends with Jessica. I mean, I actually watched this documentary before we even connected, and I remember that's one of the first things I told you. I don't get moved very easily. I don't watch tons of TV anymore. I don't have a lot of time, and I literally have watched this entire thing 3 times. It's phenomenally made. It tells a very heartfelt story, not only about Jenny, but everybody that's a part of it. You can tell that everybody, George, Tom, all the females, all the interviews, like everybody poured their heart into this, and it really. It bleeds all over that screen, and it's phenomenal. So I hope if you're listening to our podcast or you're watching this on YouTube, if you want to support our podcast, go watch this documentary because they did a phenomenal job. I can't say it enough. People are probably tired of me talking about it. I've put it all over my Instagram. So yeah, you won't. It's not even super expensive. It's like $5 or $6. It's, you'll spend less money watching this documentary than you would getting a freaking hamburger from McDonald's. So don't be cheap, buy it, support the show. You're supporting people that, put 5 years and a lot of blood, sweat, tears, traveling. For those of you that don't know what it's like to make something like this, it took years, a ton of prep and planning. So again, sorry for beating the dead horse. I'm sure you guys are tired of hearing it, but please go support this project. Any plans for any future projects, documentaries? I know we talked a little bit.
No plans for like a new project, but what I will say is there's tons of what I call treasure trove footage. It's the footage of these incredible characters that just didn't make it into the final cut. So working with Will to continue to, edit some of that and be able to put that out on Altru's, platform, because ultimately these are role models, and to inspire the next generation. We know that we can't be everywhere at once. We can't be in every school, in every community, but kids are online. So we got to be online. And so this to me is like, establishing that digital presence so that we can engage the next generation online.
Yeah. And if you've enjoyed any part of this podcast, I would highly suggest you watch this documentary, because you're definitely going to see some of these figures on our podcast in the future. And, the documentary definitely captures good portions for this documentary, but all these characters that we've prepped their podcast, because there's some that are coming up, their individual stories, life stories are crazy. So it's another way to, you can watch the Guerrera documentary, and then you can see some of those characters come to life on this podcast as well. So that's going to be a fun joint thing that we'll have together in the future. And it'll be fun to see the future projects that you guys have going with Will. I know we talked about one offline that's coming maybe in the future. Let's talk about your nonprofit. I know you spoke a little bit of kind of, the genesis of the name. Can you, Altru was born from, CST alumni uniting to honor fallen teammates. What was the spark that led to this nonprofit getting founded?
Primarily, again, how do we create this living legacy of our fallen teammates and embodying those values and sharing that with the next generation? That was the spark, and it's grown out of just the CST community to really be kind of an enduring home for women of special operations and combat arms and just warrior women in general at large. Because there's not prior to Altru, there's no Green Beret Foundation, Navy SEAL Foundation for, women of this community. So there was a needed space. So we've come together. So we kind of break down our activities in 3 core pillars. Altru Lead. Lead is kind of the internal look, caring for ourselves, making sure that we're taking care of the warrior within so that we can put our best foot forward in front of the next generation. a lot. We provide community and critical resources for that kind of greater warrior women network. Altru Inspire is everything kind of focused on that next generation. And again, I talked about it a little earlier. Like there's two things that we really do to equip youth, and it's growth mindset and then access to internet. That's not as much of a problem in the U.S., but overseas, when you're Pashtuna and you're in a rural area of Kandahar, which I think is an ironic kind of storyline too. Ashley and Jenny were both killed in Kandahar. We have internet support to a school in Kandahar. To me, that's like the direct legacy of like, hey, we've built this camaraderie with our partners overseas. That mission hasn't ended just because we don't have boots on ground. Like we're still committed.
The Taliban could suck it.
Exactly. And you listen to, sorry, I'm going to go on a little tangent here, but Special Operations, Command, General Fenton talks a lot about the power of partnerships. And it's, again, in SOF's nature, the Green Beret, you go out, you create these strong connections with our allies and partners, because again, we can't be everywhere, and so we rely on our partners to share the burden for us to be able to accomplish what we need to from a national security lens. For Altru, a lot of the the sponsorship of internet and digital tools, again, may not apply as much to the U.S., but our Afghan partners, we're there for them. That mission has continued even after the withdrawal, and that's that little shimmer of light, of hope, that keeps that spirit alive for Pashtuna and her students. And they learn the stories of Ashley, they learn the stories of Jenny, of Majabin, of Shannon Kent, and there's a thread that connects us all, and it doesn't matter what country you're from, again, your background. People want to have the opportunity to be treated with dignity and respect, and to lead full lives.
Yeah, I just think it's awesome. Hey, there was a third pillar. We got off on a tangent. What's the third pillar for Altru?
Altru Win, and that's problem solving at its core. So we have a program called Lead X, so lead, fill in the blank, and we encourage, again, the next generation to identify a problem. We help coach them along the way and bring a solution to it. And for us, and for the role models that are part of the network, a lot of that is working with impact partners overseas. Again, we're in Afghanistan. We just did a mission to Kenya, brought internet to Samburu Girls Foundation, and I'm working with those students who are victims of gender-based violence to help them create their own sustainable livelihoods there in Samburu, Kenya. And that can look like a lot of different things. Just like in SOF, you have a lot of different complex problems, but you're going to identify one and kind of get after it with a lot of mission planning experience and a lot of rigor and purpose and drive behind the role models that are involved in solving those things.
I love it, man. Just embodying and emboldening that next generation to get better, do better, be better. You guys engage with universities, ROTC, high schools, with these stories of sacrifice. Can you share a memorable interaction with students?
One of the first engagements that we did was in West Virginia. We went to Wheeling University and then Lindsley Middle School. And on that particular panel, we had Pashtuna was with us. And I remember this one question from the audience was about what she thought about her students that were going to school every day under the Taliban, like the risk that they were taking every day just to go to school. And you could see on this student's face that there was this like light bulb, this perspective that kind of was opened up like, hey, it's a privilege that I'm able to attend this institution and have access to this education, and I'm going to make the most of it because, Peshana then relayed to him, one, she lifted up her sleeve and showed a burn mark on her arm where she was a target of a attack. Luckily survived. A friend of hers did not, because she was standing up and being an activist for women in Afghanistan. And she, again, tells the story about every day her students showing up regardless of the current leadership dynamic right now. And that's that instilling hope no matter what.
Super cool. Altru supports PTSD awareness and veteran reintegration. How are you guys working in that space?
We're really just a belly button for a lot of different veteran service organizations who are looking to support, particularly the women of the community, because that's kind of our primary network. So we work with, you mentioned Hunter 7 earlier, Operator Relief Foundation. A lot of people come to us just to say, hey, I want to make sure that your community is aware of these resources. And so we've put together what we call a holistic framework, and it just includes across the core pillars that Special Operations Command has as part of their preservation of the force and family. We've just binned various veteran service organizations within those pillars, and we ensure that the community is like aware of all those resources. And then on our side, I've mentioned before, like a lot of way that I've dealt with trauma or loss has just been relying on the community itself. So what we provide is ourselves is, again, just that network, and that in and of itself is healing in a lot of ways.
They say your network is your net worth, man. And I truly believe that, man. How can listeners get involved? Donations, volunteering, advocacy. What do you guys need?
Thank you for asking that. I think the easiest way you've mentioned is watch Guerrera. So the proceeds from Guerrera will be donated to Altru and help us continue our mission efforts. So watch Guerrera. That's easy action
All
number
you
one.
Cheap asses, please pay the $7 or $8. You won't regret it. It's awesome.
And then wherever you're an alumni of, maybe whatever school, whatever maybe private company you're at, we are eager and happy to send some of the role models from our network to you to engage with, your team, your organization, your school. And so happy to bring these incredible warriors to the forefront of your organization. I think that's the only other thing I'd say. Hey, if you want to get involved, again, we're all about sharing these great stories and sharing these examples of great leadership. So the more asks that we have to do that, the more we're able to reach more people.
Awesome. Any upcoming events or collaborations that we should know about?
We have an annual event. We call it Altru Gather. It's every year in October. Ashley and Jenny were both killed in October. It also just marks our endeavors in Afghanistan. So every year we gather. This year it's in DC. Next year it'll be in New York City. We changed the location. But if there's anyone out there that wants to support, whether be a sponsor or get involved or meet these men and women in person, we'd be happy to include the more people in those types of events. And there's always a hard workout, so get ready to sweat. And there's always a good memorial as part of it.
Say less. We might send a representative as well.
Love it.
You have a passion for the next generation. It's something that's like exuded when we talked, especially as we prepped and even, as we've been hanging out. Talk to me about kind of that next generation and what that means to you.
The next generation, that's our future. And so every time, I have younger sisters, I have nieces and nephews. When I think about securing American values and our way of life in the future. It's all about the decisions that this next generation is going to make, and I want them to be as prepared as leaders to live their fullest lives and to solve hard problems as possible. And so that's where I like to dedicate my time.
Kind of as we close out this podcast, I just want to throw just a couple rapid fire softball questions at you. How was your journey from the Signal Corps to SOF to Altru shaped your view of courage?
Courage can be viewed in a lot of different ways. It doesn't always mean running into a firefight, running to the sound of the guns. It's both physical and moral. And so I think that there's courage within all of us, and we can demonstrate that again in a lot of different ways.
You've had a lot of roles in leadership. You've got a ton of leadership experience. What's a key takeaway you would give an aspiring leader?
You got to be authentic. So you got to know yourself and be yourself, because if you try to be anything else other than yourself, it doesn't sit with people, right? And then the other thing that I think has made me successful is leading with gratitude. It's a privilege to lead, especially in the military. And, when I left the Air Force Academy, it wasn't guaranteed that I was going to find another way to serve. I mean, luckily I ended up commissioning in the Army, but, I approached every day in service as this is a privilege. And if you keep that at the forefront of your mind, then I think it makes you definitely a better leader. And then, lastly, the humility piece is kind of tied very, very closely to curiosity. And, my husband is in the military as well. And one of the things I admired about his leadership style is he never was at a rank too high that he wouldn't go and talk to the lowest enlisted person on the team and learn from them. And that's something that, I try to replicate, as well. And it applies outside the military. It can be in a private organization, like know your people. And again, I think that starts with leading with gratitude and with humility.
Awesome. Some diamonds for those of you out there taking notes. With debates about women in combat resurfacing, and I know we talked about it a little bit, what's your perspective on women in SOF, whether past, present, or even future?
Just keep getting after it. And that is what is going to be so good they can't ignore you. That's a Kat Harris quote. She's one of the characters in Guerrera. Just show up, perform. Don't let the noise deter you. Don't let self-doubt stop you from raising your hand to try out for something ambiguous or tough, because I'm telling you, we need strong men and women in SOF. And particularly, there's a lot of things that for the women specifically that you're going to bring to the table because of your gender. And again, I don't say that to make gender the reason why you should or why you're going to be successful. But in irregular warfare, in the way we operate yesterday, today, tomorrow, there's always going to be a way that your gender can be leveraged as a capability.
Yep. You've honored teammates through Guerrera and Altru. Why is preserving their stories so vital to you?
Personally, they're my heroes. And so for me, it gives me, maybe that's a selfishness in me, because I feel that it's healing for me to tell their stories. But kind of back to the core purpose of Altru and Guerrera, it's not about me. It really is about the next generation. And I think that telling their stories is an example. There are examples of leadership of courage that will inspire and create that next generation of leaders ready to solve hard problems, whether in uniform or out of uniform.
We're not going to say his name. Your husband's a badass. I'm well aware of what he's done and where he's at, and our nation owes him a great sacrifice. So I just wanted to publicly acknowledge him. Is there anything you'd like to say to him? I know you bring him up quite often. I know he's, I know you love that dude a lot, and this is kind of your forum just to tell him.
I love him, and he's working hard right now, defending the nation. But no, thank you for hats off to him. I appreciate that. Yeah.
Awesome. And then closing out, what's next for you? Personal goals, Altru projects, new stories to tell. Any final messages for listeners? What you got?
Man, well, there's a lot. I got a lot of, I'm always juggling all these different things, but I'll tell you, I am incredibly excited. I'll name one Altru thing I'm really excited about. We just closed out an event with San Diego High School. San Diego High School is Jenny's, where she went to school, and we did an event with the junior ROTC cadets there. Took them out on a leadership reaction course. We brought out some Navy SEALs. We had some of our former CST role models. George actually did a virtual event with them as well, kind of leading up to this leadership reaction course event. But they had a blast, and they want more of it. And so, the school's breaking for summer, but come next year, we're going to start a full-fledged legacy school program there at San Diego High School, and continue to, again, share Jenny's story and inspire students coming through that school with that story. Awesome.
You're extremely busy. I know you got a lot going on. I just wanted to personally thank you for your time, for giving us your time. I think you and I have talked a lot since you've been here. My views on time and how important it is, and how I think it's one of our greatest things in life that we've missed. So thanks for sharing your time with us. Thanks for sharing your story, for being bold, for being brave, and for being a powerful voice. It's been an honor to get to know you, and I look forward to our friendship. And I look forward to our podcasts, partnering with Altru and continuing this well beyond this episode.
Thank you so much for having me.
I just want to thank everybody out there, as I always do, man. We wouldn't have a podcast if you guys didn't listen. The feedback has just been unreal. I'm having a hard time keeping up with all the emails and the DMs. So if you send me something and I miss it, it's not me ignoring you. We don't have a massive staff. I wanted to thank our sponsor for today, Alpha Country Nutrition and Training. Their supplements are phenomenal. Spencer will be coming on the podcast here pretty soon. His supplements are all made in the U.S., and they're awesome. I've been using the Bangalore pre-workout, and it's fire. So use Vanguard, code Vanguard 20. So that's Vanguard 20 on Alpha Country Training Nutrition, and get 20% off. And for everybody out there, man, stay safe. And if you can't be safe, be violent out here.